right there.
That's it. Okay, members, thank you very much, and you're all very welcome to Fáilte Roimh Uilig to the 40th meeting of the Committee for Communities. We do have a quorum, and I now declare the meeting open. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available there in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to Assembly's Wi-Fi network. No recordings or photographs may be taken. And can I remind members about the protocol regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly and in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and be aware of cameras and the sensitivity of microphones throughout the meetings. Finally, I remind members of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. So do members of any interest they wish to declare in relation to today's items? And I will declare just that I own a rental property from which I derive a rental income. Any other interest, members? No? Okay, thank you, members. Moving on, members, to apologies then. Can I check, Clerk, are there any apologies?
Andy Allen.
Andy. Members aware of any other apologies? No. Okay, thank you. Okay, members, so Chair's business then. We had previously agreed to hold a meeting in the Ulster Folk Museum, Cultra, and a provisional date of 5th of June has been agreed now with the venue. Are members content that we hold our committee meeting at that site on Thursday, 5th of June?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Thank you, members. So, members, there has been an announcement. So there's 153 million investment in FTC funding for Co-Ownership Housing Association. I'm sure members of the committee will welcome this announcement, and it will hopefully see members in our communities able to buy a home. I will be keen to see more of the detail as to how exactly that's going to roll out, but I think it's welcome to see that investment. So, okay, members, moving on then to the proposed cuts to disability benefits, which continues to create significant concern, I suppose, out there amongst people, and a lack of detail, really. Just to note, members, that we have, as of last week's meeting, we agreed to send letters to the department seeking specific information in relation to the North and details of their ongoing conversations with Department for Work and Pensions, because we do realise that there is likely to be a disproportionate impact on any of these measures here in the North. We wrote to the Secretary of State regarding concerns on those specific circumstances here and child poverty levels here. As well as this, we have sought the views of our counterpart committees in the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly, with a view to sending a joint letter on these draconian cuts, which will affect a lot of the most vulnerable people in our society. But I just want to check then if members have anything additional this time that they want to, Kelly?
I'm not 100% certain if this data might be available, but it would be useful for us as a committee. The proposed changes to PIP, can we get the detail? How many people are on PIP? How many people what is in the Green Paper so far, talking about people having to achieve 4 points in some of the categories. Do we know, or do they know, how many people actually do achieve 4 points and how many don't? Because that might be an interesting matter to consider. I know that we don't have all of the detail. It's a Green Paper, it's not finally decided, but next week, the 26th of March, it's likely that some of the announcements will actually be more formal, and we sort of need to know how much that's going to be, how much our department is prepared for those changes, and obviously that'll take a bit of time rolling in, but it's also, if we could ask the department, given the fact that these amendments are coming forward, are they going to increase a bid for communications, because there's a lot of fear out there of what may happen, and at this stage some of it is may rather than is definitely happening. The other thing is as well, in the paper it talks about employment support that they have piloted in England. I think we need to ask the department for a comparison of our employment support or support into employment programmes to see if we are ready for the changes that is coming forward in the benefits system, because I'm not 100% certain, as it says in one of the paragraphs, that it's a devolved matter here and we're not part of their considerations. If they're implementing these changes to welfare on the basis that England, Scotland and Wales have the powers to support people into employment, are we ready here?
Are you content with
Yeah.
the detail of that? Are members content that we request that information?
Sure, I
Maurice?
think it's vital. I know it's not final yet, but I think it's vital that we get as much information as possible, because it's a big workload, and I'm sure every one of us office, you know.
Yeah.
So I would agree, absolutely.
Yep. Thank you, Maurice. Brian?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think as a committee we'll all, and as elected reps, we'll all want to acknowledge this has caused a lot of anxiety for people, particularly who receive PIP, but other disability-related, health-related benefits. And it doesn't help that there's a lack of clarity about how this will all move forward. So the more information we can request and get, I know we're waiting for announcements from DWP in the first place, but as Kelly has said, there's also, when you read the full statement, as I'm sure some have done, there is a lot about support, as Kelly has said, for helping people into employment, and the more information we can get in that, and we're aware of our local groups who've had cuts in their funding from, so you know, the levelling up funding. Sorry, supporting. Or remind me the name.
People?
No, but
UK Shared Prosperity Fund.
Thank you, Kelly. Shared
That's
Prosperity Fund. I should have prepared a note for myself. But seriously, the point is the 40% cut in funding going into the new financial year. So if there is going to be more support for that employability support, we don't want groups going to the wall, you know, and losing important skills among the workforce who are delivering that support. So if we maybe just ask for an update on the funding for those currently for the next financial year for those employability support groups. I'm familiar with the ones involved in Belfast Works, but there'll be other ones across the province. We were given a list at some stage.
Yeah.
It is important work because, and I know that happens also at the statutory level through the Jobs and Benefits offices, that there is coaching for people. But I think the voluntary sector groups just have a reach as well, and working with people and finding where they can be helped into employment where possible.
Yeah.
But we're also mindful of those who are not able to work, you know, that they also must be supported. So my request is just if we can get an update from the department about what support has been provided for those employability support groups in the voluntary community sector.
Thank you. I'm very conscious, and members agreed with Brian's suggestion. I'm very conscious as well that this is in time when that same sector is facing into the NIC increases as well, and all the uncertainty around that. So it's a very difficult time. Melissa?
Just on the same topic as well too, I don't think I've ever had as an immediate response to any announcement as what I've had over this whole issue from people ringing me up where they're really concerned about the implications for them. And at probably two levels too, i.e. those that feel that maybe that in some way that their benefits are going to be reduced or limited, and that maybe are even been forced into a situation that they know themselves they won't be able to cope with in terms of work. And in addition, the question continues to arise, just as you have alluded to, the whole imposition then too of, say, the increase in national insurance and so on, and the impact that that'll have on the Northern Irish economy in particular, even in our own civil service in particular, and whether or not there's even jobs available for those people whom government thinks they're going to be sort of replacing or forcing into a work situation, you know. So, say there's a lot of concern out there at the minute.
I'm just wondering, should we write to our counterparts in the Committee for the Economy and ask them what has been the initial reaction from businesses with regards to the, you know, trying out work? Because like, I employed people in the past and they'd said to me, somebody's going to come to you and they might be able to work, you know, the job you're looking for is full-time, but they might be able to work some of the day and it'll be a temporary arrangement until 6 months, but then you might want to make that permanent. It's very vague on that, and I've always had concerns how our employer's going to react. As Melissa has said, you know, how many jobs are going to actually be made available for people to try work? So it might be worthwhile if we asked our economy counterparts just what has been the initial reaction of employers to the Trying Work scheme.
Yeah, because I think, and I have said previously, there are people who have been excluded from the workforce, and that those barriers need to be addressed and removed. But if that was your principal goal, you'd think you would nearly start there with schemes, talking to the disability sector, talking to the employers as to what schemes that could genuinely create that would look like. I think that a lot of the fear is coming, and I'm picking it up as well, and I have to say it is fear. It is. I would characterise that as it's way more than concern and worry. It's fear, and it's one of the biggest impacts I've seen. And I think what's really relevant here is we're in the midst still of a cost of living crisis, and people are so existing kind of week to week that, and things are so difficult already. The idea of further pressures is just really creating a huge amount of fear. Sean, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I would agree with so much of what's been said. I think the way that this has been communicated has really exacerbated the fear. The fact that it was either leaked or briefed to the press ahead of time when people didn't have the answers, they didn't know what was going to go on. Then we now have a situation where the Minister for Work and Pensions is saying, well, I can't give you the exact figures of how many people this is going to impact because I have to wait for the OBR on to report, and I have to wait until the budget on March the 26th. You know, it's kicking the can down the road of releasing clear, concise information for people. And in that void, you then end up with the fear. And I think then that's, for us, there's an extra layer to that because we don't know how the Northern Ireland executive or our minister is going to, what's going to be brought in and how he's going to deal with it. So I think there's a couple of things, Chair, that if you don't mind, and I know that my colleagues talked about writing to the economy committee, it would be really interesting as well to hear from them what is in place currently for 18 to 22 year olds. For me, this arbitrary number of 22 is really strange. I really don't know where it's been found. I don't know any other statutory organisation that uses 22 as a cutoff. And so for any young person who comes off the Disability Living Allowance for Children at 16, they're going to push it back to 18 apparently. They come off at 18 and they're not allowed to apply for PIP or the health element of UC until they're 22. That void for 4 years, what happens? So I would really love to hear from, I suppose, the economy minister as well as our own minister, what is currently in place for that 4 year period. And what needs to be put in place. The other thing as well is that I just really worry when you look through, when I've read the green paper, now you look at the investment that's going on into other departments and other mitigations, not just financial mitigations, but other support mitigations, whether it's mental health, money into the healthcare system, money into employment support programs. We're not going to be getting any of that. It's every time it mentions investment in those things, those other support networks, it then says this is devolved to Northern Ireland. Wales and Scotland will come up with their own scheme. But the fact that it's devolved to us means that there's no support system in place that they are putting in place in GB. So I think whether it's something that we write to our own minister for communities and ask what conversations he's having with the Minister of Health, with the Minister for the Economy, to see what they could all do in a linked up way. But yeah, the whole situation's dire, basically.
Okay, Claire, could you just reflect back what we have agreed there? Or?
Yeah. The last question, can I just check with Sean, is that to be added into the letter to the Economy Minister specifically? Because the last Kelly's action was the Economy Committee. So to the Economy Minister to ask what support is currently in place for those who are 18 to 22.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
And also to the Communities Minister as to what conversations he's having with health and other
health
departments.
and economy. And I suppose as at an executive level, I do think this is going to be cross-departmental. But they're the two departments that I can see when I read the green paper that have had investments in GB. So the Department for Health and the Department for Economy, I think, are the two main departments here that would be relevant that GB are getting investment in terms of the green paper.
And what are the plans here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to reiterate what Shannon's saying there, like for instance in the Green Paper it says that they will ensure that patients are treated within 18 weeks of referral. Like 18 months would be good here, never mind 18 weeks. So there's investment going into health, investment into GP practice. That's not happening here.
Yep. Brian?
Yeah, it might have been captured there, but I mean, given that this statement was branded as pathways to work, if we are writing, we are writing, sorry, but if we're contacting Westminster, whether we go through our own minister to ask, will there be, specifically ask him to request, will there be additional funding coming for employability support? Is that the intention? And I know government or funding that comes to Assembly to Stormont is allocated locally, but whether this is part of the thinking about what the future of shared prosperity funding is, but that I think we do need that specific allocation of funding, that it's not just about, I know Westminster's Labour government saying they want to see a 5 billion, which potentially 150 million around that would equate to in Northern Ireland from those benefits per annum, but specifically to ask to lobby for a budget to support employability support programmes in Northern Ireland, so that there should be an increase through a Barnett consequential. So it's not just about cost cutting.
Members content with that?
Okay.
Brian's right actually, because if the money is allocated via councils in England, we don't see any of it. So the Barnett consequential would be important, but I don't know if Minister Lyons would have that detail or be able to even ask about that detail. It might have to go through finance. But there's no harm in asking at this stage, and then I suppose we could follow up with finance.
Employability is under this department, as everyone knows.
Yeah.
And we should remain alive to the fact that we have written to those other committees, and we're seeking, a united front in order to reflect the huge concern here and the impact these cuts could potentially have.
Just to be clear, we do have employability, but we don't have all of the access to employment supports that goes through economy. Ours is largely about disability, so we'd need to be asking economy actually to reflect on what I suppose Shannon's already said about that, what's going to happen to the 18 to 22s. What about the over 50s?
So does the committee want to add to the letter to the Economy Minister, will there be additional support via Barnett consequential for employment support?
Into employment support, yeah.
I think that should go to both ministers, because I think there is an overlap between communities and economy.
Okay.
Just if you could add into that letter the Barnett consequentials, what's a time frame for the rollout? If there's any increase in the consequentials to Northern Ireland, a time frame for rolling them out, because there's quite a considerable delay from the decision of Westminster actually reaching here.
Okay. Yeah. Time frame for rollout.
Depending on the monitoring round.
Okay.
Okay, members, thank you for that. And Clerk, are you content? You have everything you need there in detailed terms? Okay, thanks, members. So, final item then in Chair's business then is I want to advise members have been asked to attend a NICVA event on Tuesday 25th of March at 1 p.m. in the Shannon Chamber, and have been asked to cover the role and remit of the committee, our current work plan priorities, some reflections on current issues facing the voluntary and community sector and the people that it serves, and to take some questions. So I just want to inform members of this, and hope you're content that I intend to speak on behalf of the committee at that event. Yeah. Thank you, members. Okay then, members, moving on to draft minutes there, which I refer you to at page 6, and these are from our meeting of the 13th of March. Are members content to agree the minutes of 13th of March as drafted?
Yeah.
Content, thanks, members. Matters arising then, item 4. So you've been provided with a summary table of matters arising at page 20. Due to the pack being put out earlier this week because of the bank holiday, we've only one item under matters arising to consider from the main pack, and then there are 3 in the tabled pack. So can I ask firstly if members, if you have any comments then on item 4.2? Or otherwise content? Yep, members content. And so then I'll go to table papers, and at page 3 there's a further 3 items under matters rising. So could I ask the members for any comments or queries on items 4.4, 4.5 or 4.6? No, the members content as noted. Yeah, and the
One
correspondence.
query,
Yeah.
the fuel payment for members in residential homes, who's that payment paid to? Is it paid to the home or the individual? And how do we make sure that people who are not pension age but are still vulnerable receive that payment as well? Is there any methodology for us to ask the Minister? No?
We have, the committee has asked, yeah.
Okay.
And responses have indicated that those monies paid to the individuals in the homes in that case.
This is just part 1 of, with another question in with the Minister about the people who are not resident during the qualifying period. Yeah.
That's right. So members otherwise content then with the memo? Yeah. Thank you. And correspondence then, members, and the correspondence memo is at page 24, and there's a table correspondence memo at page 27 of the table papers. I intend to go through these items by number and groups and ask viewers to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any specific item of correspondence. So can I ask if members have any comments on items 5.2 to 5.6? Kelly, Nicola,
Yeah.
then Melissa.
Right, 5.2 first of all, and then a 5.4 and 5.6. 5.2, page 58, the Fiscal Council. There's a comment within that I think as a committee we need to pick up, and it's about the income generated by communities. And the Fiscal Council's report says rather untransparently about the fees that the department receives in, and then it goes on to reference their Fiscal Council report, Northern Ireland Public Finances in Northern Ireland, and in that it says again that it's a bit untransparent, not those words, but I'm sort of summarising, of how the fees are broken down. So I just wonder maybe if we could write back to the Fiscal Council just to, if they could elaborate on that comment on page 48 about the income generated and how it's rather untransparent, and if they have any suggestions of questions that we could maybe ask, whether it's communities or the Finance Minister, of how we could maybe remove or make it more transparent.
Yeah, members content with that? I think it's...
Can I check, is that
Fair.
58 of the committee pack or the Fiscal Council report?
I think it's page 48 of our pack, is it?
48 of our pack, the budget process. Okay. Yeah, I see it. They're page 19. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yes, so it's that third bullet point
Yeah.
down.
Got
It's a
it.
bit stood out for me.
Thank you, Kelly. Nicola?
Thanks, Chair. I just want to flag the same report there from the Fiscal Council. I think so. That's their assessment on the draft budget leading into this year. I think it's just important to note that their concerns about the extreme financial pressure that the executive are under. They've outlined a few specifics there, the likes of the national insurance contributions, the likes of the cuts or the PSNI data breach, the costs that's going to have, holiday pay, things like that there. So again, it just almost amplifies the concerns with these welfare cuts about how anyone's meant to afford, like, soak up any those type of costs, you know. So I just think it's worth flagging that their report it is worthy. But I agree with Kelly, we should be writing to query those issues as well with the transparency.
Thank you, Nicola. Melissa?
And again, too, just as in relation to the national insurance contributions, and where it states like that here in the north of Ireland that there's a very large public sector. And funny at times I often think that's contradicted by comments that I hear from ministers at different times who would talk about the difficulty that they have in recruiting people. And I wonder to what extent, whenever they talk about the large public sector, are they also talking there too about jobs maybe that are not filled at the present time? And that if it is the case of them wanting to be seen to be reducing the amount of cost in terms of the increase in national insurance contributions, is it likely that we are to see then to that same public sector reducing the number of people that are employed there? I don't know if that is the case, but I wonder just if we could get some clarity on that. And I'd also like to just make the comment too that an increase in the national insurance contribution and that essentially will come out of our block grant then as well too.
I think some of the public service, there's more money coming for it.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's a wee bit like given to you in one hand and then taken it away in the other. So that...
I've already said it won't cover it, whatever's coming.
Sorry, yeah.
I've already said it won't
And
cover it.
I think that's a concern that we should be aware of as well.
Yeah, and then on 5.6 there, for the committee to decide we wish to receive a briefing on the report from the Welfare Mitigations Review, Independent Advisory Panel report. Do committee wish to schedule a briefing on that issue?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Brian.
I just wanted to check. I mean, it's the 2022 report, and we had a briefing on that before. Is that right? But we've been given updated estimated costs of the various mitigations. I've no difficulty hearing the briefing again. But I just wanted to clarify the 2022 report. I think we did have Les Allenby and colleagues in before, but happy to hear it again. You know, but it's only the updated estimated costs.
Yeah, committee had asked for updated information in relation to...
I think we're required
Yes.
to receive those or request them, yeah. But no, happy to have the presentation, but the report itself hasn't changed from the independent group.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kelly?
I was going to say on page 248, just given what we've discussed earlier following the production of that Pathways to Work Green Paper, could we maybe ask the Department or the Minister for an update on the employment supports, it's following on from what we discussed earlier, that are comparable to those discussed in the Green Paper for England, Scotland, Wales, and get a costed table if the same programmes were to be provided and rolled out here, how much that would be? Because, yeah, it just would be interesting to see how much, because then that gives us something to work on for the budget. And later, if it's okay, I come back to 5.4.
Yeah, are you content, Clerk, with the
Yeah,
detail?
so
and
it's a
members?
costed table of
Costed
the
table.
employment support programmes,
It would be
similar to
comparable.
Scotland and Wales as listed in page 248.
Members content with that request? Yeah, and was there something else, Kelly?
Sorry, 5.4, just to go back to that, page 95 of our pack, can we ask the department what bids they have put in for the additional FTC that's available?
Members content? And you've got that, Clerk.
Yeah, it's for additional FTC.
Okay, members then otherwise content with those items, and moving on to tabled items, which are at 5.8 to 5.10. So members, any queries or anything that members wish to ask or draw out there? Members content? Okay, members, thank you for that. Okay, Clerk, yeah. Okay, members, thanks. So we're moving on then to agenda item 6, which is SR 2025/52, the Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order, NI 2025. Members have been provided with a copy of the rule at page 253. We considered the SL1 for this rule, members, at our meeting on the 6th of February 2025, when we were content for the Department to proceed to make the rule. So do members have any objection to the rule?
No.
No. Can I then formally ask that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025/52, the Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order, NI 2025, and has no objection to the rule, subject to the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Are we content?
Content.
Thank you, members. Agenda item 7, SR 2025/53, the Social Security Revaluation of Earnings Factor Order, NI 2025. So this has been a copy of the rule provided for members there at page 262. The committee considered the SL1 for this rule at its meeting on the 6th of February 2025, when we were content for the Department to proceed to make the rule. Do members have any objection to the rule? No. Thank you then, members. Can I formally put the question that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025/53, the Social Security Revaluation of Earnings Factors Order, NI 2025, and has no objection to the rule, subject to the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Okay, members, so we're moving then to agenda item 8, which is departmental briefing on fuel poverty. So this will be an oral briefing only, members. No papers have been provided. On this topic, National Energy Action forwarded some points about this issue to the committee team, and these have been included from page 28 of your table papers. So I'd now like to welcome the following officials to the meeting. So we have Angus Kerr, Director of Climate Change Division, Una McConnell, Head of Fuel Poverty, Strategy and Departmental Climate Change Action Plan. We have Maeve Cormacan, who's Strategic Advisor on the Fuel Poverty Strategy, and Adrian Boyce, Head of Home Energy. So, Angus, I think it's yourself maybe is going to make a brief opening statement, and then we can move to questions from members. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for inviting us here today to talk about the draft proposals for the fuel poverty strategy, which, as you know, have just been out for consultation. We're delighted to be here, and we're very keen to understand your views and take questions and so on that as part of the consultation process. So, addressing fuel poverty in all its forms and ensuring access to safe, warm and affordable housing are top priorities for the Minister and the Executive. You'll be aware the fuel poverty strategy is a key action in the programme for government under priority to provide more social and affordable sustainable housing in the PFG. The strategy also contributes to several outcomes across government relating to health, lower carbon emissions and supporting green jobs for economic growth. It makes an important contribution to the just transition to a low carbon future by its focus on actions to help eliminate poverty, inequality and social deprivation. I'm sure you will agree that fuel poverty affects far too many people across Northern Ireland. Our most recent modelling suggests that in 2022, more than a quarter, 27%, of households were living in fuel poverty, and this figure is unacceptably high. The impact of fuel poverty can be felt across our whole society. Living in a cold home creates health risks for people of all ages. Cold and damp homes are linked to worsening respiratory conditions, cardiovascular diseases, poor mental health, dementia and hypothermia. And this is particularly important for vulnerable people or those with existing health conditions. And for children living in a cold home, in addition to having the detrimental effects on their health, it can also have an impact on educational attainment as well. We heard many times during our pre-consultation stakeholder engagement and during the public consultation process about the lived experience of fuel poverty and the mental impact of having to choose between electricity and gas, the dread of the sound of the electric beeping, using blankets rather than turning on heat, which impact on people's health and also dampen mould. So this strategy and its implementation is really very important. In terms of the process we went through in developing the strategy, we undertook a period of intensive stakeholder engagement, as I've said, to make sure that it was based on people's own experience of fuel poverty. We made use of other people's experience and expertise. We built on related policy work elsewhere and developed what we hope were the right solutions to support those who are most in need. We established a project board to run the work with senior officials from relevant departments across government, as well as the Housing Executive, Consumer Council and Utility Regulator, to provide the oversight and strategic direction for the work. We also set up a reference panel which had external representatives on it to provide that external expertise and advice and also challenge as well. From April to June 2024, we held workshops with stakeholders from across government, statutory agencies, the voluntary and community sector, councils, housing sector, energy companies and industry to gather opinions and explore initial priorities. We also engaged directly with those living with fuel poverty, and in total more than 365 participants registered for the workshops and focus groups. The engagement was crucial, I believe, in developing the draft strategy and the actions and proposals that are in it. Feedback from participants was very positive, welcoming the transparent and inclusive process that we went through, and stakeholders had a feeling of being heard and recognising their contribution when they looked at the consultation document. This collaborative approach has continued during the public consultation process, which we've just completed, and everyone has had an opportunity to provide input and feedback. And it will be important that, as a department, we follow through on all this positive engagement in the final strategy, and indeed with its implementation going forward. I just want to very briefly give you sort of a summary of the key elements of the draft strategy. The strategy proposes an ambitious vision for a warm, healthy home for everyone, underpinned by guiding principles, and they are long-term sustainable solutions, a needs-based approach, and collaborative and participative working. The focus is on making homes more energy efficient to address the root causes of fuel poverty, build partnerships to identify and support those most in need, and improve consumer protection as well. The strategy has 3 key outcomes: improved energy efficiency vulnerable households, secondly, increased access to trusted energy efficiency advice and the measures, as well as support for low-income vulnerable households through partnership working, and thirdly, informed, protected consumers with access to essential, sustainable and affordable energy. To help achieve these outcomes, we will make homes more energy efficient by raising standards, including revising the Decent Home Standard, minimum energy efficiency standards for the private rented sector, improved fitness standards for all tenures as well. We are also seeking increased investment in energy efficiency schemes for vulnerable households, and propose that all domestic energy efficiency schemes should take account of fuel poverty principles. We ask about the potential for alternative funding models as well, suggesting a sliding scale of support with people paying more based on their circumstances, loans for landlords perhaps, and if we should use levies to fund energy efficiency schemes for low-income households. The consultation also proposes an expanded and more ambitious fuel poverty energy efficiency scheme to replace the current affordable warmth scheme. We plan to call that new scheme the Warm Healthy Home Scheme, in line with the vision. We are proposing more flexible eligibility criteria for that, an income threshold that increases with inflation or minimum wage levels, or another method such as a consumer price index, continuing the whole house approach to retrofit, and then how we phase in the introduction of low carbon heating solutions where possible. We recognise the installation of renewable technologies may also be needed to offset the running costs, especially for those in low incomes. Collaboration and building capacity are a key objective of the strategy. The strategy proposes to utilise and enhance referral partnerships across government to raise awareness of energy well-being, identify people in fuel poverty and provide support. To achieve this, the strategy is proposing a new one-stop shop, the implementation of aspects of the NICE guidelines on health risks associated with cold homes, working with organisations to ensure consistent emergency support and referrals to energy efficiency measures and advice. We also recognise the opportunity community energy could play in empowering communities to participate in the energy transition and seek their own solutions to fuel poverty. Therefore, the strategy suggests establishing a task force or working group to develop enabling frameworks to support this. In addition to recognition of the change to the eligibility criteria for winter fuel payments that was implemented during the development of the draft strategy, we want to gain a better understanding of the impact of these changes and introduce additional support where appropriate. This could be the provision of energy advice, referral to long-term support, or energy emergency financial support. The third objective is to protect consumers by implementing a new support framework for energy affordability. The proposals for this include improving our understanding of the impact of energy decarbonisation policies on domestic energy bills, raising awareness of existing price protection tools, and investigating targeted affordability tariffs for certain vulnerable households. We also want to ensure robust protection and redress for heating and energy efficiency, and agree minimum quality standards for all energy efficiency schemes, and ensure appropriate aftercare and redress for government energy schemes if something goes wrong. To improve our understanding and measurement of fuel poverty and to support the monitoring of progress towards meeting our proposed outcomes, we're proposing a basket of indicators. This will enable us to better understand the fuel poverty and monitor progress in a more timely manner going forward. Finally, just turning to sort of governance and accountability, as you'll recognise, this is a comprehensive cross-cutting strategy requiring commitment and support from across government, as well as statutory partners, local government, energy companies and so on, including the voluntary and community sector. Many of the proposed actions will not be delivered by this department, DFC, but will be delivered by other departments and organisations. The strategy will require full executive agreement and buy-in. Therefore, to provide transparency and accountability, the implementation of the strategy will be guided by a cross-departmental working group, supported by a fuel poverty advisory group to advise, guide and challenge over the lifetime of the strategy. We're also proposing that we produce an annual report outlining the progress in achieving the actions contained, and most importantly, we wish to keep the lived experience of fuel poverty at the centre of the strategy going forward. So thank you again for the opportunity to give you this overview of the fuel poverty strategy. While the public consultation has just closed actually a couple of weeks ago, obviously the purpose of this today is to allow you and the committee an opportunity to share your views and experience so that we can feed that into the final strategy. And in terms of next steps, we're aiming to have reviewed and summarised the consultation responses by June of this year, and to deliver the final strategy agreed by the Minister and the Executive by the end of the year. Needless to say, we're more than happy to continue to engage with the committee as you see fit going forward. Thanks again, and look forward to hearing views and taking questions.
Okay, thank you. And I have to say there were some very, very interesting strands there. I must note that it was difficult in some ways to follow some of it, given we didn't have a written brief. I'd have loved to have seen a written briefing containing that information, but there are certainly some very interesting aspects to it. I was going to ask you about the deadline or the timeline, and you said June and the end of year. So that's the end of this calendar year. Mm-hmm. I was hoping when you said June, it would have been sooner than the end of the year, to be honest. But is that a hard deadline, or is that a target, or do you think that could be improved given the pressures that are out there in communities?
We're taking it forward as quickly as we can. So it's sort of said June for analysing and understanding all the responses and representations, and then sort of over the summer to sort of begin to actually redraft the strategy in light of those, with a view to maybe in the autumn time getting it through to Minister and yourselves as well being involved at that point. So there is probably some scope to do it a little bit quicker, but at the same time, my experience of how long these things tend to take is pointing towards end of the year really. And
how many responses did you have?
I think we had about 65 responses.
Okay, so we're the only area, I believe, that don't have fuel poverty target reduction targets. Will there be targets for the reduction of fuel poverty within the strategy?
Well, the approach we've taken is, and we did do a lot of discussion on this with the various different stakeholders in terms of the different targets that they have across all the different jurisdictions, and our target here in relation to the how you measure fuel poverty, more than 10% of household income. The approach that we sort of settled on, although again this is open for views and more than happy with that, but was to come up with this sort of basket of indicators approach where you actually look at a whole range of different indicators of fuel poverty, informed by a number of different sort of sources, the House Condition Survey and other sort of government statistics that are there, to try and pick a picture, or try and get the picture of fuel poverty and where we are in terms of now on a baseline, and then monitor that going forward for to make sure that it's reducing.
Clearly other areas have decided that the way to reduce, and I would have to say I would agree, the way to reduce or to drive delivery is to set targets which then become, so knowing what's happening is very much different than to setting targets for ensuring something happens. So I think that would be a more robust approach. I suspect the other regions have went through that thought process as well and decided the targets are the way to go. So I'd have to say I think targets, and given again the pressures that are out there and the urgent need to address some of these issues, I certainly would prefer to see targets within that, because I think that, as somebody said, what gets measured gets done. So you have to be pressing down on that.
I mean, I suppose there are some challenges with the fuel poverty target because of the different variables that you have in there. Maeve, do you want to?
Yeah, I was going to jump in maybe on that point, and I know that the previous fuel poverty strategy in 2011 would have kind of set a target at that point for the eradication of fuel poverty, but it is one of these definitions that relies on 3 different factors, and one of those factors, the price of energy, is largely outside of our control. So you could maybe make a huge amount of success in one particular aspect of fuel poverty, one of the 3 indicators, but then something happens the next year beyond your control and you're almost, it looks like you're back to square one. So there was a little bit of a problem with setting a target that to some extent is beyond our control, and that was one of the reasons why England did set they set a target, but they also redefined and remeasured fuel poverty. So they have a very different approach to defining fuel poverty in England, for example, and that was one of the calls that we certainly heard through the pre-consultation process. Angus has mentioned the other indicators, and I think what we recognised early on was there was a need for accountability and transparency and visibility when it came to fuel poverty. So we work off the basis of a house condition survey for our official definition of fuel poverty, and people said that wasn't frequent enough. We need more frequent, more regular data, and so that was what we responded to when we said, okay, well, let's use other data that we collect across government, data that's published annually, not every 5 years. So that was one of the things that we did, I suppose, to create that additional visibility. And then with regards to accountability, it's better reporting, and I suppose that annual report, as well as ensuring, as well as proposing a ministerial statement as well. So moving, not specifically putting a target in, but we do recognise that there have been calls for targets, and if there were to be, as I say, we haven't looked at the consultation responses fully yet, it's only closed, but we need to look at what people are kind of responding to, and we kind of laid out in our consultation our reasoning. We'll see what people say about that, but I think what we always want to make sure is that if there are any future targets, that there are things that we can actually control. And I think that's the most important thing. We don't want to set a target that we can't reach, or there may be factors within that beyond our control.
Yeah, so if there's another Ukraine, for example, no matter how good we've been doing on income and energy efficiency, it could mean we miss the target.
I don't know if I so much buy that end of the argument, because things always will happen. That's not a reason just to forget about targets, just because something might happen that throws the target off. You can reassess in light of events. So I'm not convinced with that part of it, but I hear the more what you're saying and that, and we'll see how it comes out when you've assessed the results. I have a strong sense there around the efficiency and the climate change and all that, and those are crucial elements to all of this as well. I pick up a wee bit less of the poverty, the fuel poverty end of it, and I'm wondering just, and I'm not saying that all of those are very valid aspects to addressing the poverty. They are absolutely interlinked. But how do you envisage this poverty interacting with the other important strategies, such as the anti-poverty strategy, the housing supply strategy? How will that intersect and interlink and impact on those other policies?
Yeah, a good question. I mean, and they're intrinsically linked. So, I mean, this work's referenced in the housing supply strategy. It's been taken forward in the same group in DFC as ourselves. So we work really, really closely with them, and they're heavily involved. They're on our board. And feeding into the work that we've been doing on the draft fuel poverty strategy. So very much what we're doing here is kind of, ticking a box in terms of what they were saying in the housing supply strategy. And we've also worked very closely with the anti-poverty strategy team, because I mean, essentially fuel poverty is a sort of a part of wider poverty, and it's a fundamental issue in that. So they're running just a little bit behind us in terms of the process that they're involved with, but again, they're heavily involved in the board and the work that we're doing, and we're engaging with them throughout, and we're making sure that we feature in the work that they're doing in terms of how the anti-poverty strategy sort of shakes out, and also they're talking to us about what they see the role of the fuel poverty strategy is in terms of addressing wider poverty and linking those up as effectively as we can.
Okay, just a brief one on the 65 responses. How do you break those down in terms of individuals versus organisations? Do you have any breakdown in that?
Have we done that yet?
Most of them are organisations, and there may be more responses from citizen space, but we do. There was a Unite the union obviously did a petition on the winter fuel payment, and so there's over 1,000 responses from them. And part of that obviously refers to issues that we have in our fuel poverty strategy as well.
Okay, final brief one from me. Hopefully it's brief before we go to members then. Would you be disappointed with yesterday's announcement from SSE that they're shutting down their energy services division?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I've literally just picked up on that this morning. I sort of saw the SSE have written to our department and other departments as well. It is disappointing, and in many ways actually highlights the importance of the work we're trying to do both here in terms of the draft fuel poverty strategy, but also in the work that we're doing more widely on climate action as well with DAERA. I think it's highlighting the need to progress that as quickly as possible, Chair, would be my view.
Yeah, and they have. I think today there's actually an announcement on profits, which are significant as well, just today, and I think that's hugely important. And it may come up again in terms of how we do all of this. But they have within their press, I think, indicated that the department not bringing forward retrofitting was part of their decision. Did they contact you in relation to that in advance of closing their scheme?
Well, we've been engaged. I mean, we've been engaging with them across kind of all of the work that we do within our part of DFC, not just the fuel poverty work, but also on the climate work. So yeah, we've had a number of meetings with them. We went down as well to Dublin to see the work they're doing down there. I mean, did they tell you they were closing it? They didn't. No, I wasn't aware of that until I saw that today. And yes, I agree that it is unfortunate, and it really means we need to, I think, redouble some of the work we're trying to do in this area.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go to members. At this point I have Kelly, Nicola, Brian and Morris.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. I declare an interest. I submitted the Alliance Party response to this, and I've moved from being very interested in buses to thermal bridges and retrofitting. But one of the things that I'm concerned about in the fuel poverty strategy and the questions that I've responded to, let's be very honest, if you're very wealthy in Northern Ireland and there has been a beautiful housing development put up in the Four Winds that are Passive House standard, their cost for energy is really low compared to what somebody living in an old housing executive house will be paying for energy. What I was surprised was the lack of question, do you think we should replace oil in Northern Ireland, which most housing executive properties in rural areas have. So I'm just wondering on that, the fuel poverty strategy, if we throw money at people, it will not solve the problem, but if we fix the problem, then people won't have to spend as much money. Linking in, maybe it is linking in with the energy strategy coming through economy. How are we looking at that? And is there an idea at this stage from the department how long it will take? Because I'm quite concerned about providing fixes for vulnerable adults, which is quite sporadic across the whole area, instead of taking a place-based approach.
Yeah, I mean, good questions, and I think probably drawing out the interdependency of all this work, because there's a lot of work going on the climate side in terms of trying to bring forward the policies and proposals that will deliver on those requirements. There's the requirement to have the just transition, and that's I think where you come into the fuel poverty territory, where we need to make sure that, for example, if we're moving away from oil, which is currently the cheapest fuel in Northern Ireland at the moment, that by moving into sort of electrification, heat pumps and all of that it's affordable. And so that's part of it, the purpose of this consultation is to draw that out. One of the key elements of this is the new affordable warm scheme, which we're calling the Warm Healthy Homes scheme, which part of that will be tasked with trying to actually strike that right balance for the more vulnerable and poorer households, in terms of making sure that it is affordable, and the extent to which we go and which houses and which households we do that with, and whether we need to use renewable technologies like solar panels to help actually cut the cost of energy, so that actually even if you are moving to electrification, you're actually able to pay for it through the panels and batteries and so on that you might have in your house. So it's a huge challenge. There's no doubt about that. And we're working very closely with DFE. They've been taking forward an awful lot of work that they're doing on. For example, they've just completed a consultation on the low carbon heat, which is a big thing, and they're doing all sorts of other work as well around energy efficiency. We have established a joint group, the Regional Decarbonisation Coordination Group, it's easy to say, that we chair jointly between the two departments, which is bringing everybody together to talk about these interlinked issues from both policy side and sort of implementation side.
And just on that then, so when you think about fuel poverty, it's not just the income. Actually, some homes are just always going to be poor at poverty. Has there been any discussion about moving or adding to EPC by using the BEAR rating that's in the south that takes that whole house approach top down, and it means then you can do X, Y and Z to a house and actually bring its rating up significantly without having to do everything, get to heat pump standard for instance. Is there any talk about using BEAR? I just think about all the others who are not.
And that's like one of the most, the number of conversations we've had about what do you use to measure this, you know, the inadequacy of EPC. They're reviewing that now in England and other measures. Maeve, do you want to comment on that?
No, that's just what I was going to say. You know, we do recognise that EPCs are imperfect. I suppose all measures are imperfect, and there's maybe two aspects of it. It's how quickly we could or would move ahead of the changes that are happening in GB, and the fact that there is a consultation in GB recognising some of those flaws with EPCs and seeking to provide alternatives that give both kind of consumers, in terms of people who are buying houses and renting houses, and the landlords who are renting those houses, that gives them the information they need, but also provides the information that government needs as looking for as well. So there's that process, but then there's the secondary aspect maybe, which is a bit more individual, which is when we talk about putting new measures, new energy efficiency measures into people's homes, we're never going to rely just on an EPC either. We're not proposing that a scheme says that it is as simple as that. For a lot of homes, and probably most of them, I don't know if Adrian might want to pick up on this, but we will require those proper technical assessments for someone to go in and say, okay, I have now looked at your attic, I've looked at your walls, I've assessed the age, and these are the recommendations. So that kind of bespoke solution to the house, and not just relying on the EPC itself.
I was in Louth County Council looking at some of the work that they did on their equivalent of housing executive type houses. Amazing work, but it was very honest that they didn't have to do full passive house retrofit. They could actually work through that BEAR test of a house. I'm just thinking as well that the consultation talks about the eligibility criteria and looking at the most vulnerable first, to be honest. Thinking about, say, for instance, the housing executive stock, you know, I've the West Winds outside Newtownards, 1,100 houses. There's only 250 of those are still housing executive responsibility. The rest are all purchased. So if you were to pick out those houses, the cost to do that actually would be made cheaper if there was an incentive for everybody to come on a place-based approach. I appreciate we don't want to put so much pressure on the department because the budget's not going to be able to do that, but is there any joined up thinking as to, like the Ulster Bank have talked about their green loans that are available, you know, you've talked about the renaming of this scheme. Is there anything like that will maybe come together and say to people, we can actually talk our construction colleagues into coming out of the south or away from other countries to be here to deliver, and here's a place we're going to concentrate on. We'll do the vulnerable and we'll pay for that, but everybody else has the opportunity to get a savings based on work because it's concentrated. Is there any thought on that?
Yeah, we're working quite closely with the Belfast Retrofit Hub, which Belfast City Council are sort of leading on, and that's actually really what they're trying to do, is to take a pilot area with quite challenging sort of circumstances, a mixture of tenure, private rented sector, you know, housing executive homes and homes maybe that have had the right to buy, so they're you know, owner occupied, and try and find a way to bring together, I suppose, all the regional kind of approaches which departments tend to take and apply them to a place, and see if we can get them to work. So and do it in one kind of package, so you get those economies of scale. But it might be, the complexity is that obviously the housing executive could be paying for the housing executive homes. It could be the affordable warm schemes is paying for some of the owner occupied ones, the private rent sector, and other schemes as well that we can get. So in the background there's lots of different funding strands, but to the people that live in that area, they're just getting the work done by the same contractor at the same time and in the same way, and you get those economies of scale, and people are but it's challenging, you know, to get people bought into that and to bring it forward. But there's a lot of good work going on there in terms of trying to do it on that basis. Just
my final one then, sorry Chair, is to stop this from happening in the future, are we going to see planning reform that has a better standard of fuel economy and takes away fuel poverty?
You remember my previous hat. Well, I mean, yes, I mean, there's lots of work going on, I think, in DFI on planning reform and so on, and speeding up planning, and they're fully involved in all this work on the wider climate action plan work and so on.
Thank you very much. I know I asked a lot of questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Shelley. Nicola.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your briefing here this morning. I want to touch on the impact of the cost of living crisis. We know it's still affecting households right across North and right across society, and undoubtedly that then increases fuel poverty right across society too. So I want to know, first of all, what your current assessment is of the levels of fuel poverty across the North, and what impact the cost of living crisis has had on that, and then what the department is actually doing to plan for next winter, and specifically in that case for older people who haven't been eligible for the winter fuel payment this year. And I know obviously we welcome the emergency fuel payment that many did receive, but moving on to next year, what's the department doing now to mitigate against that?
Yeah, I'm going to bring it in a second on this, but I mean, those really good questions, and I mean, as I've said, the current sort of 2022 is the latest estimate we have is 27% for fuel poverty, which is really high. If you go back to the House Condition Survey in 2021, I think it was 24%, so it's going up. The next House Condition Survey is due out in 2026, so we'll get another picture then of that. I mean, whenever we did all the stakeholder engagement work on this, the focus groups and workshops and so on, we really heard of the impact of this from on the ground, and it is pretty harrowing whenever you're actually hearing people saying the things that they were saying about not being able to afford to heat their homes, choosing between eating and heating and all of those different things is really difficult, and definitely is a fundamental part of what we're trying to do. But Una, do you want to sort of add to that?
Well, I suppose in the you'll know that in the strategy we propose analysis of the impact of the winter fuel payment. Now, unfortunately, we'll have to use the House Condition Survey results from that, and that might not be in time for this winter. But we are looking at other aspects of research and data, and maybe working with partners so we can get a better understanding of the impact, and then we can maybe look at support that we can give to older people who've been impacted, who've maybe moved into fuel poverty as a result of the winter fuel payment, and that might be working with the partners to increase better advice, maybe eligibility to the affordable warmth scheme, and further support if needed. So we're going to take some research on that. But I think in terms of next winter, I think it'll be a continuation of what there is now, the cold weather payments, referrals, discretionary support scheme referrals to make the call. I think, in our fuel poverty, our strategy, I think a big part is working with partners that we have in the voluntary community sector and the trusted partners that people work with to make sure that people are accessing all the support they can. Yeah. And that was during our stakeholder engagement. A lot of people recognise the support they get from our partners, and we maybe need to work with them more to support them.
Thank you. And just come back to your point, Angus, about the impact that fuel poverty has on families, and we talked the impact it has on mental health and physical health. You talked about respiratory conditions that people suffer there because of living in these poor conditions. I wonder what kind of level of engagement you've had with the Department of Health in regards to this strategy. And to follow on from that, and we mentioned the one-stop shop, maybe you could give some more detail on exactly what that involves, and then what level of engagement you've had with those departments and that there as well.
We've had a lot of engagement with the Department of Health and the Public Health Agency, who were involved in the sort of steering the project board for bringing forward this strategy, and really positive engagement. They're coming at this obviously with really limited budgets, but they're hugely interested in this type of work because they see it as prevention. It's actually it's not just treating the symptoms of health complaints. So they're hugely supportive, and we'd work. You'd probably noticed in the strategy we've put in this idea of trying to find ways to implement the NICE guidelines, which are focused on cold homes and addressing that issue, and they've been around for a long time. So I think we've shone a light on that and got some commitment from them through finalising the strategy to try and figure out how we take that forward a little bit better. So that's all been, I think, really positive. There's a lot of commitment there and a lot of engagement from health.
And what about the one-stop shop then? Yeah,
the one-stop shop is fundamental. Every time we went out there, we heard about the one-stop shop and its importance as a sort of a one-stop area to get advice where people can phone in and say, look, here's my circumstances, this is my family, this is my home, I'm thinking about, I'm struggling to pay my bills, I want to make my home more energy efficient, I want to, find ways of cutting emissions, where do I go, how can you help me? And at the moment there is an advice line run by the Housing Executive through their HECA work, which is good and it is open to everybody, but we heard that we need something much more than that and expanded that can not just provide the advice but also point you in the right direction of where you need to go to get support and help in terms of doing the work that you need to get done to your home.
Hopefully people will benefit from that there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
And does that need to wait to the outcome of this, or are you working now on putting that in place right now?
We are working on that, yeah.
I was just going
Does
to
that need to wait for a strategy, or can that, if that's so important, can it not just be done?
I think there's different maybe interpretations of a one-stop shop. People are looking for different things from it, and there's already community hubs in communities where people know, for example, advice services, and they can go there for help, and they'll kind of walk in one door and they'll get maybe referred to a number of different places, and in a way that's a type of one-stop shop is not just related to energy, but it is related to lots of different advice on access and benefits or debt, for example. So there's certain models that are already out there, and Una's already mentioned kind of partnerships that we want to build on the strengths of what's already in communities. Maybe for those it's about bringing in a little bit more energy expertise, so it's something local and accessible with a bit more energy background. It's not necessarily what is a single one-stop shop for the whole of Northern Ireland, for example. So there are different models.
I do think there's value, because I come across as a constituency, Emily, where an inquiry comes in, is there support from me to help with fuel poverty, and are you housing executive, so within that single area, a single point of contact would be really useful, I think, for people and representatives. But anyway, we'll move on. We need to move on, maybe. So we'll go to Brian then, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your answers so far. You've answered some of my questions. I want to ask about the minimum energy efficiency standards in the private rented sector. That's one of the sectors where we all come across the greatest problems, and a lack of monitoring and enforcement. When we had a presentation on the registration scheme, I think we were told only around 60% of private rental properties are currently registered. It's now through Lisburn and Castlereagh City Council, which is very disappointing to even be able to monitor it. We don't even know, all the properties aren't even registered, and that should be a statutory obligation. I think it is actually.
Yeah.
It needs to be done. Is there any feel at this stage for how those minimum standards will be monitored and enforced? I mean, currently, is it done currently at all, and is that responsibility with councils through their environmental health divisions, or is there an idea that there should be some overarching independent body? Sometimes people have proposed the idea of some sort of private rental monitoring body, at a cross-country level, or is it envisaged that it still remains under, as I say, local councils as part of their environmental health?
You're sort of, I suppose you're straying in the areas beyond the remit of our division in terms of looking at the fuel poverty side of things. I mean, really what we've said in the strategy is that minimum energy efficiency standards are really important, and we need to actually bring those in and have them right to deliver on what we need for addressing fuel poverty, and the approach that we'll be taking to that. And that's going to be taken forward by a team in the housing division in the department, who will be doing the sort of the work around that, following on from the launch of the strategy. So I'd be just nervous about getting into too much about what the kind of governance arrangements are for the sector. I'm not aware of it, and I don't know whether or not anybody.
During our engagement, we did hear the importance of, as well as having framework, the importance of enforcement, but that all I think needs to be worked out along with the standards and everything. So it will be something that will be kept in mind.
But I'm reading from your consultation document. DFC is enabling legislation to establish standards for the private rented sector. Given the highest levels of fuel poverty are in this sector, we propose to set minimum energy efficiency standards for PRS by 2027. Landlords will be required to comply with these new standards within this strategy period, and the exact date will be subject to consultation. So, proposing to set that minimum standard, and landers will be required to comply with that standard. So how will that be done?
I suppose that, in a sense, that's still to be worked out. So that process, there's a process that will be going forward for the minimum energy efficiency standard, policy development, consultation, and legislation will be required for that. I suppose what we heard from, loud and clear from the stakeholders that we talked to was that this is a really important issue for fuel poverty. And as you rightly say there, it's in the strategy. It's the highest level of fuel poverty is actually in that sector. So that's why the strategy is saying we need this, we need it as quickly as possible. But we need it to be enforced and all the things that you're saying. But it'll be the sort of, a different team within DFC that will be taking that forward and developing that policy, working with us. I mean, we'll certainly be inputting on what should the standard be for energy efficiency and how do you measure it, back to the question on EPCs and, should that be used, should something else be used? But then, working with the landlords and on that sort of piece of housing policy will be for that division.
I think maybe just because it's not the only standard that's referenced in the strategy, and I think what we heard throughout the process, there are different types of housing standards for different types of housing tenures as well, and we kind of try to touch on all of them within the strategy because it is the kind of document that you can look at these issues strategically and how they may interconnect. And the importance of accountability and ensuring that standards are adhered to came across from everybody, as we spoke to them, and I suppose particularly the private rented sector. So it's more at the strategic level within this document that I suppose the principle that there should be the right kind of accountability and there should be the adherence to standards. But as Angus said, for any of the standards that we have kind of mentioned within this strategy, there may be different ways of ensuring that, I suppose, regulation of the standards.
I'll go back to the comment earlier from the chair when he asked about targets and measures, and I understand what you're saying about it's not just energy efficiency, it's price of fuel, it's income levels and so on. But where we're improving the efficiency of properties, that can be measured, and that is under our control. And certainly so I think that should be measured. There should be an annual measure of that, and there should be targets for that, because those improvements can be made. So I think that is something that we can control. I want to ask, if I can, Chair, I was surprised you said earlier, Angus, oil is currently the cheapest fuel in Northern Ireland. I mean, when I switched to gas, I have to say, I thought my energy fuels or bills went down. So is that the case, though? I see Kelly nodding.
I'm an oil user, yes. It's quite cheap at the minute, yeah.
Okay.
And that's what we heard. Sorry, there is the volatility. Yes. So that one of the issues that we heard from people was...
Well, the question I want to ask is, what is there an idea? What is the future? I mean, we're putting in the gas infrastructure. We're told we should be moving away from those biofuels. So I've asked this before, and you hear at various stages talk about heat pumps, talk about, as I say, whether there's a new type of biofuel as opposed to natural gas, and solar heating, whatever. Is there a consensus on what the best future models are, both for energy efficiency and for reducing carbon emissions?
Well, yeah. I mean, let's start with the Climate Change Committee, which provides independent advice to the UK. They've just produced their carbon budget 7, it's called, for the next sort of UK carbon budget. They will be coming to Northern Ireland with the advice specifically for our carbon budget 4 very shortly, within the next few weeks. They're talking about electrification as being the main focus for what needs to be done, if you like, to hit climate targets and so on. Now, they're not saying exclusively just electrification, and they're not saying that that should be implemented very rapidly. It's a sort of it's a pathway, if you like. Over time, you're getting to that particular situation. So. This is a sort of a big cross-departmental issue, with working closely with our colleagues in economy and the work that they're doing on energy, and they're working very hard to decarbonise energy by introducing renewable energy, so that whenever we do electrify, actually what's happening is you're not using electricity that's being generated by fossil fuels. that is part of the challenge of the work that's going on, I suppose, at the moment with the climate action plans and so on, is to sort of begin to plot out for Northern Ireland what that route will be, you know, taking account of the advice that's available and the direction we're going in. There are other technologies, as you've said, out there, and that's all being investigated by DFE as well. Biofuels and biomethane, hydrogen, all those different options are there. And there is that recognition that that's a journey that we're on. So, you know, even when households convert from oil to gas, there's quite a significant percentage reduction in emissions in that. So I mean that's still one fossil fuel and another fossil fuel, but it's moving you in the right direction. But there's no doubt, I suppose, the overarching kind of direction of travel is electrification.
Okay, thank you.
So Maurice and Melissa, if I could ask you just to both be as brief as possible.
I'll ask 3 questions at one time, Chair, to try and save time.
3 small questions.
3 small questions. The first one is, do you have the budget available for your strategy, and not also your strategy, but the projected lifetime of the strategy? Have you any parts of the strategy that can be quickly rolled out, say in time for next winter? And do you have any funding available to move from fossil fuels to the likes of solar, etc.? Finances of change may be too costly for the elderly, the vulnerable, or the low-income families already in fuel poverty. So will there be any help or any incentives for families in a situation like that to move from fossil fuel to some of the other systems, given that there's quite a lot of people in Northern Ireland live in the rural countryside, and they're standalone houses. They're not part of a big complex where you can go in and do a big scheme, etc., etc. Has that been taken into consideration too? Sorry, that's 4 questions.
Sounded like 4, but at least they were quickly put, so they could be quick. If they could be just as succinctly answered. And listen, if there is some of this information that committee would benefit from getting back in writing, by all means, we're keen to do that as well.
Yeah. Okay. No, look, I mean, I suppose the budget, as always, that's a key issue at the moment. We do annual budgets for across the departments, and we don't go any further than that. Obviously, this sort of work is longer term and would benefit from longer, 3-year budgets and so on, which I know is hopefully where we're trying to go. It, as I said, it features very heavily in the programme for government. It's in there. It's a commitment. The investment strategy for Northern Ireland also is making its way through to the executive, and that also recognises this work. So I can't say there's money available here and now, but the direction I think is right for that, and that's going to be something that will obviously need to be considered when we finalise the strategy and have an action plan associated, which will be fully costed. And indeed, the other work that's going on across the climate world and so on is the same. When it comes forward, it will all be costed as well. So hopefully that answers that question. When we finalise the strategy and produce the action plan, there will be things in it which can be rolled out quickly, and those are the things that we're going to kind of identify, and we will put challenging targets to have them rolled out as quickly as we possibly can. Other things, this is a long-term strategy at the end of the day, so there are going to be things in it that are going to take some time to deliver, so there's no point in sort of denying that. And I suppose the sort of issue around support and funding for the move and the transition from fossil fuels, that's key to what we're trying to do. That's going to be built into the work that we're going to be taking forward on the new scheme to replace the affordable warmth scheme. So that'll all be part and parcel of that. Was that everything?
Fossil to solar. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Maurice. Thank you, Melissa.
Fáilte Rómhaith Uig, he's all very welcome, and Maurice, in fact, I think he's really covered my question as well. And it really is in relation to how ambitious are you in terms of, i.e., the retrofitting and so on that one would expect now in the near future?
We're trying to be as ambitious as we possibly can be, but within a recognition that in Northern Ireland we are a little bit behind. There are issues with supply and capacity, which I touched on earlier. A lot of the sort of skills and workforce working on all these different issues are down south, so we need to begin to change that. So we're trying to be as ambitious as we can, but within the context of recognising you need to be realistic realistic around delivery and so on.
Yeah, and just in addition, I was in a house last night where definitely the affordable warrant scheme is working because the heat would have put you out of it. But the people, as I say, had serious medical conditions. But I also asked them the question in relation to the affordable warrant scheme, and it's to be appreciated that those that are in DLA and the likes of it now, that's not taken into consideration if they're looking boiler replacement and so on. But is there any intention, we'll say, to address this threshold of the 23,000 at the present time? Because once again, it is even as a result of, we'll say, benefits and that people would receive, that they can just breach that figure, and it leaves them at a disadvantage.
Absolutely, that's fundamental. It's something we heard quite a lot in all the stakeholder engagement and in the consultation process, and we're wanting to make sure that the new scheme addresses that and actually puts in place a way of making sure that the whatever the new threshold is, it changes through time depending on retail price index, consumer price index, and so on. So you don't have to have the situation where you're sort of stuck with a figure, and it's a bit of a long process through legislation to change it. So that's one of the challenges. Adrian's working on
very much to try to future-proof it almost, that we take that ambiguity out of it, that we have to go back in and change secondary legislation each time, say a household grants limit or construction inflation rises, that we're not stuck until we put it through yourselves and go through the whole process. So grant limits came across because we're missing the working poor, pensioners now at the top end of that. We're missing quite a chunk of people who could benefit from it, so we want to try to gather as many as we can.
Thank you. And just picking up on that point, Adrian, will there be a dedicated hardship fund for pensioners, for example?
Came across quite a lot. Pensioners actually saying they didn't feel they were that hard done by through the scheme at the moment. I know a lot of them are, you had to use the term asset rich and the cash poor, but at the same time we haven't consideration around even savings and different aspects to the eligibility. We could try to widen that around to try and help as many as possible, but not a hardship fund. Affordable warrant, unfortunately, is a long-term solution. It's not an easy thing to get in very quickly, and that's one thing we want to also try to do, is speed up the process and applications.
And where are the most fuel poor households concentrated at the present time?
In rural areas,
private sector, all over. Really, I think probably
rural
sector.
Yeah, they're all over. But I suppose in terms of the figures from 2016, which is the official statistics, there's more than double in rural areas compared to urban areas. Houses that are kind of built pre-2019, or sorry, 1919. So the very oldest of houses, the highest proportion. There are, we've many mentioned the private rented sector. There's also the fact that the older households, but also increasingly working poor, have come through as well. So they're well spread out, and I think bungalows and detached houses are also much more vulnerable because they don't have those additional benefits of, for example, 2 sidewalls or a single sidewall. And obviously bungalows are much more prevalent in the countryside, but detached houses can be found anywhere. So I suppose you can add up all those different factors and start to pinpoint then, but they will be fairly widespread over the country, and pockets of deprivation, which the previous affordable warmth scheme would have focused on.
Okay, well listen, I look forward till seeing the draft consultation. And I have to say, I do get a strong sense around the carbon efficiency and all of that, and that, as I say, is a key element. But please don't lose the element of equity and fuel poverty within this strategy, to address those particular concerns. But thank you for your presentation today, and we'll check with committee if there's any further actions, and maybe we'll be seeing you again soon whenever we move this along. So thank you for that, and good luck with your work in the future. Okay, members, so I just want to check, is there any follow-up actions members want to flag here? Kelly?
We maybe ask if, as part of the process, there's a map of Northern Ireland that shows where where all the most vulnerable areas are with regards to those homes. I know we've talked about rural areas, but it'd be useful if they don't already have it, if they could produce where their evidence base is. The other thing I was going to say, I mentioned BEAR, which is the Building Energy Rating, which is a very different way of measuring things from EPC. I'm just going to suggest here, there is a company in Newry called Bayview that are experts on it, and I don't know whether we want to ask them for a quick presentation on how they have done it in the south with the retrofitting.
Yeah, there's also a company in Enniskillen that have a very high standard of passive house production, mass production, I think. So it'd be maybe interesting if we could locate. I can maybe forward you on some information, Claire. Might be useful to get a similar kind of a
That Bear one,
information from them.
It just shows how you can approach a house and fix it from the roof down without having to do everything all at once. It might be more cost effective, especially for those working poor and pensioners who are asset rich but cash poor.
Yeah. In relation to that SSE, I wonder, should we write to ask for that? Seems a very regressive step at this point in time, as you're looking at a situation where you're bringing forward a strategy and they close that department down. It's unclear to me.
What was it to close? I didn't hear.
So they have an energy division. It's employed 55 people, and they have, as of yesterday, announced that they're shutting that down. They've cited in their stuff that part of the reason is they haven't been engaging on retrofitting, but I think we should get an understanding both from them and the department as to what led to that decision and how that's going to be addressed in the light of the absence of that scheme. If members are content, were you going to say something else, Kelly?
I was just going to say that it's a company that does retrofitting and energy upgrades, and you'd sort of think, well, sure, that's what we need, but I think it's just too early for them. There isn't money being pumped into retrofitting at the minute, so it's a bit of a waste of their time.
Yeah, it seems like an almost a mismatch in communications, where one thing's moving here and the other thing is falling off the radar on the other side of it.
I just comment on the same thing, Chair. Because that company actually was losing money as a result of not having, we'll say, the working out there for them. So that you'd ask yourself that question, how ambitious are they in terms of this retrofit in the first instance? Should not be creating sort of opportunity in that there for a firm like that.
Because we know the need is there.
Yeah, exactly.
We know the need is there.
So was that letter to go to SSE and the department?
Yes, I think better. Yeah, but given that the department are saying they had no knowledge of it, I think it'd be important to give the department the opportunity to.
Rationale for closing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. If members don't have anything else, we'll take maybe a short break there and then come back again in about 5 minutes, and we'll be going back to our student briefing from the students. Thanks, members. Can I ask the clerk to take us out of broadcasting for a short period of time?
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Right, folks, we'll ask the clerk to bring us back into broadcasting.
SU Live.
Okay. Thank you, members. So that's us back now, and we're resuming again at agenda item 9. So this is an NUS USA briefing on student housing and affordability survey. Members, a copy of the briefing paper is at page 273, and I now welcome the following representatives to the meeting. So we have Kieran Minto, who's president of Queen's Student Union, Ethan Davis, who's president of Ulster University Student Union, and Ben Frail, who is NUS USA president. So Ben, I think it's yourself that's going to make some opening remarks, and we'll then go to questions from members. Appreciate you coming today, and I know you had sent us this survey some time ago, and we were very keen that we would hear from you in relation to the issues that students are facing. So thank you, and please go ahead.
Amazing. Thanks everyone. Thanks very much to the Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to present evidence here today on the student housing crisis in Northern Ireland. It's great to see some familiar faces, and thanks to all the members who have previously engaged with NUSUSI, and for those I haven't had the opportunity to meet yet, I'm really looking forward to be able to continue conversations after being in here. My name is Ben. I'm proud to be serving as the president of NUSUSI, the National Students' Union here in Northern Ireland. We represent and campaign for over 130,000 students and apprentices across further and higher education. Our organisation has a long and proud history for advocating for student rights. Since our formation in 1972, perhaps more than any other campaign though, housing has always been a cornerstone. Students have always been fighting for affordable, quality and secure housing. I'm joined today with some of our members, Kieran Minto, President of Queen's Student Union, and Ethan Davies, President of Ulster University Student Union, to present some of the most concerning findings from our Student Rent and Affordability Report published in November of last year. Our online survey received responses from across Northern Ireland's further and higher education institutions, focusing on areas such as housing affordability, living circumstances, housing conditions, as well as other things such as budget. Today we'll start by providing an overview of the report, and we'll give some commentary on the housing difficulties and pressures that students face, as well as some potential solutions that we would urge committee members to consider. We understand this sits in the wider context of the housing crisis here in Northern Ireland, but we're pleased to speak up for students today, a group which is often overlooked when it comes to housing. Firstly, to set some context, I wanted to give an overview on the types of accommodation students are currently living in. Our report has found that 63% of students are living in some form of rented accommodation, whether that be private rented or in halter residence. It's also worth noting that 31% of students still live with parents or guardians. That's 13% higher than the UK average. While for some this may be a personal choice, I would say this is also indicative of a wider cost of living crisis and challenges in attaining accessible and secure housing. It's also important to say from the outset that students are not a singular group. If I asked you to picture a student, some of you might consider a student to be an 18-year-old undergraduate student, some of you might consider a 35-year-old nursing student, and some of you might consider a mother doing a postgraduate degree. All those descriptions are correct. We must bear this in mind when it comes that students come from all walks and stages of life with different modes of study, different needs and different aspirations. Housing costs now represent the single largest expense for students, often consuming the majority of the budgets. Our report found that 44% of students have less than £100 left after paying all their housing costs. So where do students turn to for support? Our Rent and Affordability Report found that a shocking number of students are being pushed further into debt. 28% of students needed some kind of loan from a family. That's not family given money, that's actually a loan that then they need to repay at some stage. And perhaps more shockingly, the number of students that have reported being pushed into credit debt, whether that be 14% of students having to use buy now, pay later schemes, 13% relying on credit cards, or a further 13% having to take out bank loans. Shockingly, 2/3 of students in Northern Ireland have skipped a meal as to not being able to afford it. Half have gone without heating their homes, and 19% have had to access food banks. That's a 12% rise from when we done a survey in October of 2023. Look, student unions used to be a place where people just went to enjoy themselves, a place for a good night out and great events, and to not get in trouble with the two beside me. They still do that. They still do fantastic events and great nights out. But since that, student unions have really had to step up to the plate when it comes to the financial pressure facing students, housing being the biggest financial pressure. Both student unions at Queen's and Ulster have paved the way in student support by introducing food banks on campus. These are fantastic services that have proved invaluable to help students. But I have a question. How have we got to the point where we need to have food banks and student unions? In no way should this ever be considered normal. There's almost this idea that being broke as a student is some kind of rite of passage, that somehow students skipping on meals or not in their homes is part of their course, just something you experience at this point in your life. Students are the workforce and leaders of tomorrow, but how are we meant to get there when they're struggling through today? Aside from revealing that housing is the single biggest expense for students, the report also found that students in Northern Ireland were much more likely to experience issues with their homes than their counterparts in Great Britain. 92% of students in Northern Ireland experience some sort of issue, whether that be mould, mildew, heating, pest infestations, plumbing or noise, compared with 84% of students in the rest of the UK. These numbers can be hard to fathom, and I just fired a lot at you. So I wanted to take a moment to share a story we received from a student in Belfast called Che. As a higher level apprentice in Northern Ireland, I find myself juggling a demanding schedule, full-time work, weekly university classes and the pursuit of a balanced life. However, the ongoing cost of living crisis has thrown a wrench into my plans. Despite working diligently, and my monthly salary barely covers the essentials. Rent and bills devour over 60% of my earnings, leaving me with little room for comfort to actually treat myself. The struggle is real. I've resorted to making excuses, skipping heating, declining social invitations, simply because I can't afford them. This example really illustrates the financial strain that students are under. Pressure that's robbing them of the opportunity to focus on their studies and make the most of the student life. Now, let's talk about another big barrier. The report highlighted rental guarantors. The requirement for rental guarantors presents a significant barrier, especially for low-income and international students. Guarantors are UK homeowners who agree to cover unpaid rent if that was to ever occur. This can be difficult for those who don't have any UK-based homeowners in their immediate circles. As I say, this disproportionately impacts students from low-income backgrounds, international students, and even those from just across the border. Here are a few examples to illustrate that point. Take one student, John. He's a student studying in Belfast in Queen's accommodation. His parents are tenants of a private rent at home, and he doesn't have anyone in his immediate family or friend circle who owns a house and could act as a guarantor. So John is forced to consider for-profit guarantor services like House in Hand, which charges students a fee of 5.5% of rent for a monthly subscription, or 5% annual rent with a full upfront payment. If John stays in a double standard room at Queen's accommodation paying £120 a week, he would have to pay an additional cost of £264 for the guarantor service. To put that into perspective, that's an added equivalent of 2 weeks' rent. And drawing on another example, Kiva, she's from Donegal and studying at Northwest Regional College campus in Derry, Londonderry. Her parents own a house in Donegal, but because no one in her immediate family is a homeowner in the UK, she is unable to secure a rental guarantor. Therefore, she must also seek support from for-profit rental guarantor services, adding to her financial burden. The same scenario applies to international students studying in Northern Ireland, creating an uneven playing field and potentially discouraging talented students from choosing to study here. I'd urge committee members to consider, is it fair that certain students should pay an equivalent of 2 weeks extra rent per year simply because of their family circumstances? Meanwhile, in France, students are able to access a government-owned guarantor scheme for anyone in a similar position. Speaking of European countries, let's also chat about student housing cooperatives. Countries like Switzerland and Germany have some excellent examples of student housing co-ops as alternatives to the traditional student housing market. By empowering students with a financial stake and communal ownership of their accommodation, student housing cooperatives create a more equitable and sustainable living environment that encourages a greater sense of community, personal development and affordability. Closer to home, there are still some good examples of co-ops, whether that be in Edinburgh or in Cork. Plus, we also have a group here in Belfast, the Belfast Student Housing Co-op Group, which is a group that, for disclosure, I am a director of, looking to establish an independent housing co-op here in Northern Ireland. I know Queen's Students' Union have done some great work on this, and I'm sure Kieran will be happy to take any questions that any of you may have shortly after, or is happy to provide written evidence if need be. Another area of concern is a rise in purpose-built student accommodation, or PBSAs. These accommodations are extremely expensive. They can be as much as £230 a week. That's just shy of £1,000 per month. Putting these type of rooms out of reach for those students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. In Belfast, the average PBSA costs £150 per week. Essentially, the normal price of an apartment, but with added restrictions such as limited guest policies and limited privacy. In Belfast and Derry, Londonderry, rising student numbers coupled with financial constraints and Stormont have increased the need for privately owned purpose-built student accommodation. With the planned expansion of the Ulster University's Magee campus, we must ensure that PBSAs in Derry, Londonderry are genuinely affordable and accessible to all students, not just those whose families happen to have deep pockets. Ethan, as a member of the Magee Expansion Task Force, will be keen to take questions on this afterwards. To summarise, we urge the committee to consider advocating for the following recommendations. Explore the viability of student housing cooperatives as an alternative to the traditional student housing market. Push for greater regulation of PBSAs to ensure their they are actually affordable and accessible to those from socioeconomic backgrounds, and reform the rental guarantor system to remove barriers for low-income and international students. Thank you for your time and consideration. We're happy to have any questions the committee have.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for the paper that you sent through as well, which is very, very useful for members. And I do want to acknowledge and commend the work you're doing. It's hugely important work, but also the way in which you're doing it, I think, is really, really useful in the sense that it's evidence-based. You have put the work in. These are not just, and you're producing the evidence in terms of qualitative and quantitative statistics. So I do want to commend you for the way you're going about this work. It's an important area. I'll do a couple of quick ones and get the members then, and we can see if there's anything wrap up. But you raised there the issue towards the end of your presentation, Ben, the PBSAs, and you know what sounds like actually ripping students off, I have to say. What sort of regulation do you think should be considered to ensure that there can't be that type of overcharging?
To be honest, I think it comes at the very early stage, especially when we're developing PBSAs. To me, we have purpose-built student accommodation at the minute that has the luxuries. It has the gym, it has the nice, it's in the nice areas, it's very nice, and it definitely has its place. However, we really struggle with that middle ground. So right now, students, and especially in Belfast, are really given a choice of either Holy Lands kind of housing or these really expensive purpose-built student accommodation. That middle ground is really void. So I think it really comes early in the process. And I think there's some stuff around making sure that purpose-built student accommodations also ensure that they upkeep renters' privacies, because there's some cases that we've heard of where the service provider at a purpose-built student accommodation block can just go into a room because it's in the building, but any other renter gets 24 hours notice. So there's just certain things like that where it's like there's some really keen regulation we're keen to see.
Okay, that's an interesting one. On the and I am very interested in the whole concept of student housing cooperatives. I think that's a model that we should longer term, and I know you are currently even looking at that. So what discussions are going on? Are there doors open to you within the various departments who might need to facilitate those discussions, or what's your take on the progress on that concept at this point in time?
Yeah, I can take that. I think we've had very sort of initial conversations within Queen's. As an SU, we've been exploring sort of different models, mostly looking across Europe at different countries and how they structure cooperatives. I think we're mostly looking at a hybrid model. We'd like to do it sort of within the umbrella of Queen's University. That's mainly because we're Queen's SU, so that's kind of the ecosystem that we understand, that we know. In terms of sort of the progress on that, I think at the minute, within the university, we're looking at, how could this be funded? How could the structure work? How could the governance work? I think it's a very interesting idea. I think it's probably the direction that student housing needs to head in the future. Introducing that sort of level of democracy and student co-ownership and a feeling of community into student housing, which at the minute currently lacks. You've got this sort of the university ran accommodation, which is very sort of hands-on, sort of high level of involvement, but it's high amount of turnover. It doesn't sort of build that community. Then you've got this sort of private landlord sector, which is very sort of hands-off, and again the turnover for that is constant. Introducing that sort of that middle run where there's a little bit of protections from the umbrella of the university, however that students are able to engage and be able to create their own community and feel a sense of ownership around where they live. I think that could tackle a lot of the issues that we have in Belfast around regeneration and around getting students to feel part of the community and to want to stay in the community and to build a life for themselves, instead of just sort of moving house to house every single year and then heading off. So yeah, I think that it's early conversations. I think at the minute we're trying to look for partnerships. We're trying to look for people that would be interested in getting involved, in support, funding, guidance, things like that, because it's something that Northern Ireland hasn't really explored yet.
Yeah, I think it's really, really great potential, and there are so many great transferable skills within that as well. And students are clearly, as we see today, very capable of doing and running, having those conversations and running that. So that's one I'll retain an interest in. Final quick one from me. In terms of the guarantor requirement, what reforms would you like to see there, or how should that be reformed to make it fair?
I'll be quite frank. In terms of the ideal word, for example in Germany they don't have a guarantor scheme. However, I also understand that the realistic, from conversations we've had within the department, this probably isn't a realistic ask at this point, as just due to the fear of landlords leaving the market. So I think we need short of just getting rid of guarantors, which is what I would be in favour of, I think we need a massive reform of the system, whether that to allow more people to be guarantors. So right now you can only be a guarantor if you're a UK homeowner, or you make 40 times your salary's 40 times whatever the monthly rent is, which is just ridiculous. So we at least need to see that requirement of who can be a guarantor come down. But I would be in favour of just getting rid of it and introducing some kind of alternative system. Also, for context for the committee, in France they have a publicly owned system, which obviously due to financial constraints probably isn't possible at the moment here, but their guarantor scheme is run by the government, so the government provides the guarantor assurances for landlords. So I would like to see just a massive overhaul, to be honest.
Okay, and given some of the eye water and charges you have and cost of rent you've set out there, the 40 times is certainly extorted in itself, way above what you'd expect.
If the chairman would like an example, just last week one of our student staff assistants had to get a house in Belfast, and because they couldn't get a guarantor, they had to pay 6 months rent in advance. On top of obviously getting 2 witnesses as well. Now they're an American, so they don't have any relatives or a stranger who would be happy enough to do that for them. But 6 months, and they had to pull that up within 2 weeks. It was.
Yeah, and just let me say, we have very clearly heard your concerns around food banks and the poverty issues as well. Just to make it clear, those have not fallen on deaf ears either. Those are very well set out and are noted. So I have a good few members now, so we can ask members just to be as succinct as possible. So I'm going to Kelly, Daniel, Nicola, Melissa, Brian and Morris in that order. Kelly.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ben. Good to see you again. I agree with you in the guarantor scheme. To me, it makes no sense whatsoever. Having listened to landlords, the reason why there's a guarantor scheme is if you take off and don't pay your rent. But to be honest, let's get real. If you're in a house and you wreck it, they're going to charge you for that. So the guarantor scheme, it doesn't make sense. And if you talked about the 6 months, I know I've spoke to landlords who have said that they want 3 months in advance. Haven't been there, done that. Getting that back isn't as easy as it was. So I agree with you on that one. We need to have a review of the guarantor scheme. What I wanted to ask you about is I'd like to tease out a little bit more about the student housing cooperatives. I know Alliance has recently come out with a paper on a new deal for private renters, and we talk about the limited profit housing associations that Austria have. It already works. So it could be based on university or government-based money that's put into purchasing, and then the repayment is the rent that comes through. So nobody ever owns it really, other than So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. And the other thing, the review of the purpose-built student stuff absolutely needs regulation. I'm very aware of the number of students who, because there's no other houses available, have gone that direction, and then they're able to get a more affordable house. But the private build student accommodation hold them to the full year's contract, and they can't get out of it unless they find somebody else to replace it. That doesn't happen with anybody else either. So I just want to get your views on that, student housing cooperatives. If it's not the students owning it, but the university or a government body or a housing association, for instance.
Yeah, I think that, whenever we started exploring housing cooperatives, I think one of the differences was we didn't come at it from an ideological point of view. We came at it from a need for housing point of view, and that was the basis that we started with. We weren't too interested in an ideological basis. We were more trying to think, okay, what do we actually see here that can address some of the housing problems we're having, keep costs low for students, and create a sense of community. And housing cooperatives was what we saw across the world as something that was working. I think some of the issues that we've seen with them across Ireland and the UK is that they are kind of small scale, and they end up being driven very much by their members. So it causes issues when it comes to growth and expansion. Whilst the European models, because they come under the umbrella of wider institutions, whether that be universities, local government, national government, it allows them space to expand. It allows them to have a safety net, it allows them to have expertise, so that tenants can come in sort of fresh-faced and take part in this, learn new skills, move on, and it can continue to expand and grow. The Austrian example, I don't know that one to specifically. Most of the stuff that I've read is around Switzerland and around Germany. There's some really interesting housing cooperatives in Germany that have seen massive expansions post World War II, as this was an idea to introduce democracy as a concept into their housing system, to try and reintroduce it into their political system, and that worked wonders. And we're seeing now those large scale housing cooperatives that were student run, especially in the 1960s, expanding now and being able to regenerate parts of derelict city centres. So that for me is the part that kind of brought me to that. And in terms of the ownership of it, I think having government ownership or local government ownership or university ownership, I don't see any issue with that. For me, the important part is the affordability, and the important part is the student input into how it's being ran.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Going to Daniel Liddell.
Yeah, thanks Ben, Ethan and Kieran for being with us. Thanks for the presentation, very, very detailed. I was just thinking there, it's 20 years next year since I went to university in 2006, which is a shock actually when you think on it.
10, that's me. 30 years.
Things have shifted. It wasn't easy to be a student then, but things have substantially worsened in terms of the challenges economically faced by students, and I suppose the living standards as well. I had 3 questions, and as the chair asked each of them, I was going, okay, so I'll ask this one, and he's asked all 3.
It was a very hard time to be a lecturer in that stage.
I am interested in hearing a bit more about the benefits of the co-op sort of arrangement, and just the work that you've begun. You said you're a director of some that's now begun, so something around that. The other is in relation to Kelly had asked about the term contract. So a lot of students that come to me that have signed up for a contract, particularly with the university-owned student accommodation, they're getting away from home for the first time, don't like the course, want to change, but then they're tied to this contract, which is hugely stressful for someone or a family even that are having to meet those costs. So how often are you dealing with those sorts of situations? Because I know students going to university for the first time often make changes if they don't like the course or if some other thing has happened. And also in terms of private landlord accommodation. So because of the cost of student accommodation in Liverpool city centre, when I was a student, I lived in what's called Kensington. It's not like London's Kensington. It's out in the outskirts. The house was single glazed. It was Baltic all the time. The heating system never worked. There was ice in the inside of the walls, and the house was broken into on 2 or 3 different occasions. That was the standard of living that I lived in when I was a student back then. In the Holy Lands, not to single them out, but as an example, probably just as the best example, what is the standard of accommodation like that students are now living in? And you've talked about mould and you've touched on a couple of figures there, but could you go a wee bit deeper into that, just so that we have a clearer understanding of the conditions?
I can touch on the Holy Land stuff, and if you want to take the contract issues, because I know Ulster have that in the student rights quite a lot. So in the Holy Lands, the standard of housing, unfortunately, from what you described, your experience in Liverpool probably hasn't changed that much. Still very much single glazed, landlord conglomerates is the best way I can describe it, where it's just a couple of landlords kind of dominate the space. And look, the housing standard is awful. I know from the house I lived in, and I lived in Stranmillis, which is slightly nicer than the Holy Lands. The mould. I remember my housemate who I lived with, every couple of weeks, if she didn't properly ventilate her room in terms of window open for multiple days at a time, all her clothes in her wardrobe were good mouldy, and she had to throw them out. That's the level we're talking about here. These houses, I wouldn't want to say aren't fit for habitation, because they probably are just. But they are a complete mess. And like you said, being broke into, especially in big up houses that have been converted into apartments, tend to get broke into quite a lot, because nobody's nobody's worried about that central door. And even if you want to take the contract stuff.
Yeah, so especially with international students, that'd be quite difficult for us. So you'd have international students who come over, and the course that they signed up for isn't what they thought it was. They came over with the expectation they'd be doing pharmacy, and the company that they've agreed to sort of get them into, either Ulster or I don't know if Queen's has a similar problem, and they're in for instead of pharmacy, pharmacology, or which isn't a huge difference, but it's a difference to the student. You do have quite a lot of first years who, as you say, sort of go, psychology isn't for me, I'd much rather do history. And then they don't want to continue doing that full year. Some do and then do a conversion, but sort of getting out of that contract, it's easier for university accommodation because all you have to do is find another person to take on your contract. But for students who are, you know, renting privately, it's either they have to find another person to take on that contract or continue paying until it's the end of the year, which I know for Belfast and Derry it's usually about a full year, and in Coleraine it's usually about 9 months to accommodate the holiday flux, but it sort of varies case by case, but international students 100% have the worst.
Yeah, it's just not flexible. And just another question, the universities, so is there hardship grants available? What percentage are they sufficient, and has there been an increase in the uptake of them in recent years?
Yeah, yes, the universities do provide a lot of hardship grants, and yeah, they're always, you know, oversubscribed. You know, the issue is that the universities don't have infinite money, and can't give it to all the students that require. I think one of the issues is kind of the goalposts have moved a little bit. There's an expectation, you know, if you come from a family with an income of, you know, XYZ, that you are able to help fund your children going to university. It's not really the case anymore. We're seeing a lot of students, especially near that sort of cutoff point where they can't get a lot of funding, especially when it comes to maintenance or hardship grants from the university. And then they're having to sort of scrabble around with, you know, working, you know, 20 hours a week whilst trying to do their studies, whilst trying to, you know, do everything else in their life. So those things are available and they are, you know, massively used. But I think that the universities currently and the SUs are trying to fill gaps that maybe we shouldn't have to be filling. And, you know, again, I don't want to harp on the food bank issue, but it is, you know, it's a little bit sort of, you know, it's a little bit embarrassing that we have to sort of run food banks, you know, for our students to try and, so that they can pay their rent, so they don't have to pay for food. You know, so I think those things are available and they are overutilised, but they're just too stretched.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Going now to our Deputy Chair, Nicola.
Thank you, Chair, and thank the three of you for attending here this afternoon and for your briefing. And I must agree with the Chair's opening remarks about how well this report is formatted and the evidence base that it showcases and the work that you've put in behind the scenes to get it here. So it is appreciated and it's very useful for us. I just following on actually from the last remarks from Daniel and from yourself, Kieran, about the food banks. So 19% of students using food banks is incredible, in the wrong way. And you were saying that's a 12% increase from last year. First of all, do you have any indication why it has increased so substantially in that year? And then just following on from that last question about the student unions actually providing food bank services. I think the universities could be doing more actually to help students as well. So what kind of engagement have you had with the university specifically about increasing their supports for students?
I think it's important to note as well with those percentages that I would class those as a significant underreporting. You know, these are optional surveys. You know, people are still, though we try to dress our food bank up as a pantry to try and make it, to remove the stigma, there's a lot of people that don't really want to say that that's their primary, you know, source of getting food for the week. So I'd say that's an underreporting. In terms of the increase, I mean, part of it is just, you know, I think there's a misunderstanding that, you know, the cost of living crisis is like a temporary thing. This is just, unfortunately, the world that students continue to live in and have lived in for years, and it's not going to improve. You know, whenever you look at students that have been in university for a couple of years, they've drained their savings, they're working more hours than ever, their parents don't have any extra money to give them, so that uptick is always going to keep increasing. You know, part of it as well is, you know, really good promotion from the Students' Union and the university to try and get more students to use them so that we don't want people skipping meals and failing their exams because they're too hungry, you know, or the stories of people passing out and so on because you know, they've not had dinner. In terms of the university's involvement, it is important to state that this is you know, co-funded by us and the university. The university has rowed seriously behind the cost of living initiatives. Again, they don't have infinite money. But, you know, I think we've had to pivot a lot in recent years to try and put a lot of focus on food. You know, some of the stats, last year we had around 20,000 visits to our pantry. Well, that's not individual students, that's visits. This year so far we've had about 12 to 13,000 in that region. Last year we handed out 10,000 free meals. You know, the university funded COVID payments for students. The university and the SU have gone seriously behind these cost of living initiatives to try and take the burden off, but it's kind of a drop in the ocean many times. You know, the issue is, I suppose, there's only a limited number of hours in the week that you can work if you're asking a student to be a full-time student and then also take on essentially full-time hours. I don't really see how they can continue to do both of those. And if that's still not enough to pay their rent and to buy dinner, you know, I don't really have a solution for students at the minute.
That actually leads me on to my next question. So obviously this has massive impacts on students' mental health and well-being, their overall kind of well-being, but also probably on their performance within university. Do you have any statistics about the level of students who have had a dropout from university because of these additional pressures? And again, are there supports from the university available to support people in their mental health issues emanating from these difficulties because of accommodation costs?
Well, it doesn't help any university to have students dropping out. That's literally the worst possible outcome, and it's something that the universities do everything in their power to avoid, whether that is providing mental health support. You know, we have a robust advice team, we have a mental health and wellbeing team. The university has similar services. We provide a lot of mental health support and all of these extra funds and what we can. Again, it doesn't really go far enough in terms of the stats. You know, Queen's tries to keep its dropout rates as low as possible. I don't think, as far as I know, we don't currently record, you know, whether the reasons are due to money. But, you know, anecdotally, I know a number of students that have dropped out because they just need to go to full employment. Whether it's a case of, you know, one of their parents will lose the job, or, you know, brothers and sisters lose their job and something, so then they have to try and step in and become, you know, primary supporter of their family. It's, you know, it's a tragedy, especially if students are in their second or towards the end of their degree. And have to drop out to take on, you know, lower skilled employment when they were about to, you know, finish their degree. So I don't have specific stats, but I do know that it is a growing problem.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Támuid le sin le tosa.
You're all very welcome. Unlike Daniel, 30 years before that again. And come from Social Security class. In fact, I got a full grant and was able to live on it. And most of my fellow students at that time were able to live on the likes of the full grant. Unlike what it is the students are confronted with nowadays. Not just the students, but even then their families then as well, because of that massive debt that's accumulated as a result of having spent 3, maybe 4 or 5 years in college. And having worked in the Northwest College for 30 odd years, and you had a lot of people coming in today as students from Donegal and other parts of the north of Ireland as well too. I'm well aware of that difficulty that they had in terms of securing accommodation. And I often wonder now just to what extent it is that we're going to be able to meet one of our own objectives, i.e. in terms of the development of Magee as a campus. And do you have much information in relation to that? I.e. the pressure that will exist, we'll say, in the likes of Derry to provide accommodation for students coming there if we're to meet this target of 10,000 students?
Yeah, so with regards to the expansion of Magee from 5 to 10,000, it's a bit of a catch-22 because we're trying to bring in 5,000 extra students and there's currently not enough accommodation to bring in those 5,000 students. So as you say, we're going to have to build something. Otherwise, it's going to remain a commuter campus, which negates the point of expanding it to 10,000 students because you're just going to have traffic jams the entire year. We don't want the accommodation to be built on the outskirts of the city because that, again, negates the point. You want the investment to be in the city centre where students can then go out on nights out and they can spend their money on things that they want to spend their money on, coffee, lunches, etc. But it also has to be affordable because you can build this great purpose-built student accommodation in the city centre, but if it's, trying not to use an expletive, ripping the money out of their wallets, they're not going to be able to then go on nights out. They're not going to be able to reinvest back into the economy. So I think for that one, it's incredibly important that, yes, we build purpose-built student accommodation that's affordable, but also in the city centre so that the expansion works I have to admit the task force has been taking on the comments from the Students' Union and the survey feedback from students very, very seriously. And I have to commend Stephen Kelly, the task force chairman, for that. But it's still a growing issue. I unfortunately will not be returning to term at the end of July. So we're handing over that representation to our incoming Vice President for McGee, Lee Doran. So I'll be 100% be able to put you in touch with him regarding that.
And just finally on that, Chair, and I'm sure it's the same situation in Belfast, this is in Derry and other locations as well too, that this purpose-built student accommodation and so on, that if you're dependent there, we'll say on private enterprise as such, there's that fear then, just as you say, that they're shafting students in these respects. I think that was the word maybe you might have been looking for, but we're attempting to avoid. But so I ask you that maybe that even in them being able to acquire the likes of planning permission and so on, should there be conditions in that in there that we could in some way make it more reasonable in terms of affordable accommodation for students?
Yeah, I would agree. I say, I my vote, yes. Good.
I think it's important to note that some of the issues with the private built accommodation is there's just no mechanism for feedback from students or influence from students. Whatever, I look at the sort of influence we can have within Queen's Accommodation, they're more than happy to hear us about anything, talk about pricing, talk about structure, talk about pastoral care that's provided. Purpose-built student accommodation, there's absolutely no contact. If rents are too high, very little I can do apart from organise a protest. There's no dialogue, there's no conversation. I also question what extra they're providing for the extra that they're charging. Whenever I look at the sort of services you can get within accommodation that is run within the university sphere, not only is there a chance of representation, but there's also pastoral care, there's security, there's proper support, there's opportunities to move. If you can't pay, there's payment plans, there's different tiers of housing available. There's an actual attempt to match where students are at and to actually engage with the market properly. The problem with purpose-built student accommodation is I feel that they sold an incorrect view of how much of a return they were going to bring to the local economy and how much they were going to revolutionise the local economy. I don't see the benefits that they've brought. All I see is them overcharging students and then ending up with a lack of services, half-built accommodation and accommodation that they're even struggling to fill these days because of the prices that they're charging.
Thank you. So Brian and then Morris, as briefly as possible, please.
Thanks for your attendance today and for your paper. Well, to comment on the purpose-built student accommodation, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but as a North Belfast MLA, I do regard it as a success for Belfast that we've seen that investment, and clearly there is a demand for it, and there's more and more being built, and there's more planning applications going in. So I do see it as a positive for Belfast that, as I say, clearly there is a market, there's a demand for it. And I do wonder what, I would have thought it might have an impact in the traditional student housing areas. I note you say in your report you feel it's actually driving up rents. I would have thought if that's drawing people out of Holy Lands areas, that might reduce rents there because there's less demand for student housing in that area.
The issue is that whenever you look at the sort of capital investment in North Belfast, I feel the area did need, and I was, personally, I thought that would have made a big difference to the area, those sorts of big buildings and so on, and moving a bit of the student population up there. The issue is because they've been able to charge such high prices, this gives license to private landlords to go, oh, well, if they're charging double what I'm charging, maybe I can push mine up a little bit. Not all students can sort of, pick and choose. Most students, Queen's students want to be in South Belfast near the Queen's campus. Ulster students want to be in North Belfast, near Ulster. You don't want to be travelling across the entire city. So it hasn't actually ended up reducing rents because they've had these very high rents and, as I said, a lack of engagement with students. So private landlords feel that they've been given license to do that. This also then puts, a lot of pressure on university accommodation that tries to keep its price low in comparison, but they're getting pressure because the private sector is pushing for changes to how university accommodation should be run. So I take your point that I think that the investment as a concept is good. I think that there could be a market. I just think there needs to be regulation in terms of stuff like Ben was saying about the right to walk into people's rooms, or the lack of student involvement or engagement, or the lack of the requirement to take on feedback. You know, I think that there is a path to make purpose-built student accommodation work. I just think currently we're not where we need to be.
And just to build off that, I'd actually take one concession from purpose-built student accommodation, which is in an environment where Stormont isn't able to provide a full sum of money to either the universities or some kind of government-owned housing. Purpose-built student accommodations have definitely, as you said, filled a hole that was needed in terms of housing, especially with the new Belfast campus in Ulster, and also then the McGee expansion. They're going to play a pivotal role in that. But yeah, I think to say they definitely have their place, but like Kieran said, I think they're close to being where they need to be. I think it just probably needs a little bit more oversight. But yeah, I completely take your point. I think, yeah, they definitely add it to the area, but maybe just not as much as we would have.
But you don't think they've they haven't reduced the demand in Holy Land Stranmillis area then? You don't think?
No, because those accommodation, they provide a sense of community that the purpose-built student accommodation don't provide, and they're just cheaper. And students don't have the luxury of being able to pick and choose about what sort of accommodation they get to live in.
There's still a shortage. Then?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, there'll be more.
A shortage of affordable housing.
Yeah. Well, one other question, if I can, Chair.
Very brief.
But what in terms of current regulations, I presume for student accommodation, particularly in older properties, I presume it's Belfast City Council who license HMOs, but also do you have much engagement with them regarding the condition of properties? And as students' unions, do you have, what regulation do you attempt to do? I mean, do you have a good landlord scheme, or do you have some sort of scoring system?
That's I think that's something we've tried to explore before. It's something that other unions have in England. I think it's a hard one to touch because you can very easily get the backs up of the local landlords, and I think we've done a lot of work to improve the reputation of students in the local area, and we don't want to sort of row back on a lot of that. I think so I think there is work we could do in that area, but the local landlords aren't particularly interested in engaging with students in terms of things like rent or the condition of housing.
I know some of them, so
yes,
I can imagine.
Yes. But however, we do have an advice service. We offer free and expert advice on housing, so that people can know their rights. I think the issue currently is a lack of enforcement. There are rules, but
from the council, then,
from the council. But I'm not accusing them of anything. I'm just saying that this is a.
But you would encourage students to.
Yes,
but I suppose students feel vulnerable if they feel their landlord put them out.
There's
all private tenants are in that situation.
Yeah, I've spent years, once back and forth in accommodation, and before I took on this job, I wouldn't say that I had a good understanding of my rights. There's currently no requirement for landlords to explain the rights to tenants. I'd love to live in a world where you collect your keys and you get your set of rights as a tenant, and to sort of normalise that as an idea that tenants have rights, and that I would like to see, and sort of better enforcement of standards and regulations. It doesn't need to be the sort of system it currently is, where students are living in very, very poor quality housing, or paying £50 for a key to be recut, or £200 to have their contract changed. I mean, these are random fees that are just added on that aren't, that don't have a strong legal basis, that we don't really need to be introducing into the system, taking advantage of, especially international students or people that don't know the system and think, well, I have a house here, I don't really have other options, so I guess I'll just have to pay the money.
Thank you. And just for information to say, our former deputy chair who preceded Nicola is actually taking forward private members' bill around those charges, and that should apply to students as well as should the council schemes in terms of protection. So Morris, finally, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. For three guys who have not been in post for a year yet, you've done an awful lot of work. But my question is on pricing. Are we pricing students out of education? Are we forcing students to go across the water to the mainland, Scotland, England, etc., rather than staying here in Northern Ireland? And are we actually promoting the brain drain away from this wee country by having that situation in place? The other thing you touched on there was, I must, in my own constituency, we have a spanking university campus, which is never mentioned, as you know, Ben. We have no land issues. Plenty of sports ground available on campus. We have a halls of residence on campus, but we've no plans in the executive to grow Coleraine. Therein lies the problem. 6.6 million removed from the university's finance and 7.7 million earmarked to McGee. It creates an imbalance. So what I would like to ask you is, how do you see progression across all the universities in Northern Ireland, and in particular our own constituency?
So you're chatting to the right people. So for context, I'm from Coleraine, and Kieran and Ethan both studied on the Coleraine campus. So we're very much, and I knew you were going to bring it up more. So it wouldn't be you if you didn't.
Your seeds are falling on fallow ground, fertile ground, I should say.
But look, I think I really support regional balance. I think regional balance is super important. I think being able to invest in all our campuses is like crucial to moving forward, as you say, in the development of this wee place, as you put it. Look, I think in terms of brain drain, completely agree. I think we're pricing students out of living here. The benefits of living here used to be that housing was relatively cheap, the fees were down, and you didn't have to live too far away from home. But unfortunately, the price is very comparable now to what they get in England, Scotland, Wales, and south of the border as well. And what I would also say is, not to sound ungrateful, because we did receive a 20% increase in maintenance loans there only a couple of weeks ago from the former economy minister, which was great. Student support here still lags behind mainland UK in terms of how much we're providing to students. So even going across the water can be difficult because they're not getting the full money. But also, our housing now is the justification used to be the housing's cheaper, food's cheaper. It's not anymore. And we're in a situation now where student finance doesn't keep up. Ethan, do you want to chat about Coleraine?
Yes, so I actually am based myself in Coleraine, as I agree with you, it is a spanking campus. The difficulty I find in terms of regional balance is it started. I think the expansion of McGee from 5 to 10,000 is going to start that ball rolling. As you know, we do have all of our eggs in the one basket in Belfast, and that is slowly now being driven to Derry, and in time, I don't know when, 10, 20 years, I'd love to be the chairman of the Coleraine Expansion Task Force. But I would say that in order for that to happen...
here in 20 years.
I hope so, but I would say that needs to sort of start now with McGee to sort of set the template, because I'd much rather see a hypothetical Coleraine expansion done right than done quickly. There's already a problem around a shortage of accommodation in Portstewart and Portrush and around Coleraine itself, so I'd much rather over the next 10, 15 years see an increase of maybe purpose-built student accommodation, but not luxurious accommodation. Like, not every student building needs a gym and a sauna, and you need a communal area, sure, but I think that if we can look at McGee as an example and then do a long-term plan for Coleraine, I'd be 100% supportive of it anyway, but done right.
You, George, will be a quick one. I actually agree with the expansion of McGee, and I also agree that we need to bring students. 80% of the student population is resident in Belfast, which is not good. So we need to follow up the McGee expansion with the Coleraine expansion and try and spread the student accommodation, student bodies across the region. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Marshall. Very, very briefly, Brian.
Okay, well, brief question, but it's a big topic. But I do want to ask you this. You're talking about expansion of student numbers. Probably other MLAs have had the same representation I've had from the universities, that the level of student fees here being lower, and the public subsidy therefore, which has to go to student places, is preventing their expansion, because effectively it's capping the places that they can provide compared to universities on the mainland. Do you have a view on that? And I know that goes against what you're saying about student finances, but that is a lobby that we receive from the universities themselves. They would like to grow, but obviously keeping the student fees down is actually preventing their growth.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll touch on it super quickly, but I know Kieran has thoughts. Look, I'm really happy to see a higher education funding review that's happening, and currently fees are ruled out of scope on that, which obviously I'm very thankful for. What I would say is, when you look south of the border and you see how much students south of the border pay versus the north, it's not like they pay a lot less than what we pay. So if you create a system where we pay more and they pay, and we're going to have a brain drain just in a different direction than what we're typically used to. As well as that, I think, look, I understand the university's point of view. They feel they need to generate more funds. In my view, that can come. I would prefer that to come from government money than the university feeling that they need to raise it on their terms. But yeah, I think I oppose the fee increase. But Kieran, I know you have some thoughts.
Very briefly, please.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, obviously, as unions will always oppose sort of increases in fees. To remove the ideology from it, I think it's important to understand that the university is the mechanism that you train your next generation of workers. It's the mechanism that you use to improve your economy. I think it's something that the government should always see as a worthy investment. And for me, passing that cost on to students doesn't work. And as Ben said, that will just increase the brain drain. And then we're stuck in a situation where we don't have the skilled workforce that we need in 10 years' time.
Okay, thank you. Listen, I want to really thank you for, I think it was really a model of a good presentation, I have to say. Information provided in advance, good information, a really good presentation, succinct and to the point, and crucially, really knowledgeable, honest and pragmatic answers to a range of issues. And I take Morris's point that you have an additional challenge of you only come in and out of post in a short. So it's a really solid piece of work. I think you've raised the issues and represented the issues really well, and represented the cohort of students who you represent excellently. I would encourage everyone who are engaging with you to engage very actively with you around these challenges, because I think you are setting out also a lot of the solutions. You're not simply setting out the difficulties. So I'd encourage everyone to engage with you on that basis, I have to say, and just take a look at what is a really good session. If I was them, I'd be waiting outside the door to fill some of their vacancies within the department. But I wish you well in your work in the future and the rest of your studies, and thank you for your contribution to the student life and to our considerations here today. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Members, any follow-up actions members want to flag in relation to this? Go ahead, Kelly.
Let me just find out, I'm not 100% certain under what regulation or legislation that the landlord guarantor scheme comes under, and if we can ask for a review of that, because with that instance, when we do have, and we are trying to attract external students to Northern Ireland, to find that they have to pay more because their homeowner in Donegal is not counted, it's not fair.
Yeah, and then maybe attending Derry, and it just makes no sense. Okay, content with that, Clerk, and members content? All right, members, go ahead, Brian.
Perhaps, if we could write to Belfast City Council Environmental Health, just ask about what engagement they have in terms of the standard of student accommodation in private rental stock, the older housing, that just how they're engaging with that sector, and making it easy for students to report concerns where there's poor housing conditions. Because I think students, quite often will feel they don't have the access, to public services.
The key question in that really is there a fear to report in the event that they be asked just to go?
I think that was kind of hinted at.
I do think, but I think the council has to, not just be at the end of the phone, but be promoting their services, within the university sectors.
And that's so. What engagement does the council have with the private rented sector in terms of student accommodation, and how are they communicating? Are they proactively?
Proactively promoting their environmental health services to students, raising awareness.
I think that's a really interesting concept around rights I don't see why anybody, why that wouldn't be. I'm not sure who or how we progress that, but that should be a fairly basic thing where someone taking up a lease, and that includes students, should be facilitated with some indication of what they can expect and what rates they have.
They're certainly being exploited in a lot of areas.
The question
Well,
has...
also the thing, Chair, is when you pay a down payment for accommodation at the end of your tenure, it's very, very difficult to get it back.
That was
Very difficult. All the excuses of the day, you broke a light bulb, you can't get your money back.
I think the expectation is that we think that all private renters should fall under the same legislation, but students seem to be exempt from it. And I think landlords treat it that way, when actually they should be getting a rent book, they should have a contract, they should be given eviction notices in perfect time, and it's that clarification. I think the expectation is that these are all HMOs, but each individual student has a contract. It's not the house has a contract in some of the cases. So, yeah.
I'm also wondering how the new landlord registration scheme interacts with students. Are they on their radar, and are they ensuring that those landlords are registering with them and regulated by them in that sense?
I would agree with Lisburn Council, on that issue.
Yeah, LCC, yeah. See,
Lammies were interested to say they were.
Make that right.
I would expect the same thing too under this new legislation, that all landlords will have to be registered, and councils or whoever it is will be actually overseeing that process as well too. Not only that they're registered, but they're maintaining properties not there to a standard and so on as well. So that irrespective of whether you're a student or otherwise, I think that you're bound to be bound by the same legislation.
The other thing, Chair, is houses, HMOs. There's overcrowding of students in these houses, and nobody seems to take on the concerns. And they're in there to make it affordable to live, but there's no consideration given to their living conditions. Maybe we could add that in, please.
Yeah. So
what's the question? Sorry, Morris.
Students living in HMOs, often overcrowding to drive down the affordability issue, but they don't seem to have the same standards and the same regulations as anybody else in the rented sector.
The question is, how are standards being?
How they've been measured? Are there enough
assessed and
bathrooms, etc.? Privacy issues.
Yeah.
In terms of the councils, it'd be the same for Coleraine, Londonderry as well. I said Belfast earlier, but I suppose through the three councils.
So
yes, got it. Thank you.
You're content with it? Okay, so good bit coming out of that, members. Thank you. I think it's a useful session, I have to say, in relation to the housing end of it, and that there's a lot of issues there that could be better and developed and worked on. So going on then, item 10, forward work programme, members. Copy is at page 310. Do members have any comments or content to note the forward work programme? Content to note. Thank you, members. Agenda item 11, any other business? And members of any other business they wish to raise today? No? Thank you. Agenda item 12 then is date, time and location of our next meeting. Our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 27th of March 2025 in room 29. Thank you. The meeting is now adjourned and we'll take us out of broadcasting. Thank you. Okay, members.
Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound.